Hey guys, tonight we slip into the cool shadow of Gondor's palace walls, where torchlight flickers across ancient stone, and you probably won't survive the silence, but let's be honest, you're already tucked in. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to drop your location and local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step from a narrow antechamber into a wide corridor, flanked by pillars carved with lions and geometric patterns. The air smells faintly of myrrh and damp flagstone, tickling your nostrils like a polite sneeze. Each footfall echoes against vaulted ceilings, and you sense the slow, measured rhythm of eunuch patrols, silent sentinels in wine-red robes gliding past archways. This is Gondor, the Camelot of Africa, founded in 1636 by Emperor Feudal, who moved his court here after centuries of itinerant rule. You can almost hear the distant tinkle of water from the royal baths, a mainstream fact often noted by travelers in the 17th century, drawn to the city's man-made lakes and monumental castles. Your heart flutters as you realize these courtiers are not ordinary guards but eunuchs, castrated servants, prized for their unwavering loyalty and absence of dynastic ambitions. Historians still argue whether the practice began under the Aksumite Empire or emerged later with Solomonic restorations. But either way, these men held unique power in this labyrinth of marble halls. You might imagine they're clad in stiff collars and iron cuffs, but instead they wear soft leather aprons lined with linen, the material chosen to protect delicate skin from palace grime. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some eunuchs reportedly used crushed ostrich eggshells mixed with scented oils as an improvised polishing paste for their sandals, because nothing says royal emissary like blindingly shiny footwear. As you drift forward, you notice a single white dove perched atop a sunlit window ledge, cooing in gentle protest at your intrusion. It feels like a bedtime story come alive. Except you're not the hero, you're the wide-eyed guest fumbling for the remote. Joke 1, you'd think they'd at least offer you tea. A low murmur of voices drifts from behind carved screens. The eunuchs convene at their nightly muster, trading updates on palace security and whispered gossip about feathered capercaillies imported as exotic pets. Yes, those lumbering grouse-like birds once strutted around royal courtyards, astonishing emissaries from Portugal. Their torches cast warm pools of golden light that dance across polished stone floors, revealing fissures where time itself seems to creep. You sense a faint vibration underfoot, perhaps the distant hammer of a smith forging ceremonial daggers. Imagine a eunuch carrying that blade in his sash, the metal's weight like a secret pressed softly against his hip. Joke 2, very inconspicuous, right? In reality, most eunuchs never handled arms. They were scholars, administrators, musicians, and above all, keepers of confidence. You pause beside a mural depicting Fasilide's coronation, eyes drawn to the vibrant reds and blues that have defied centuries. One eunuch stands just behind the emperor, hand gently resting on a jeweled staff. That staff, by the way, held a hidden compartment rumored to harbor love letters from a Portuguese princess, an embellishment that may owe more to palace gossip than actual archives. Historians still argue whether such romantic intrigues truly breezed through Gondor or were later spun by travelers seeking scandalous bedtime stories. Your skin tingles as a cool draft snakes through the corridor and open window high above, framed by carved motifs of peacocks and palm fronds. You wonder if any eunuch once slipped through here to whisper counsel to a princess locked away in an inner courtyard. Joke 3. I bet the palace security cameras were surprisingly low. The hush of the night sea sonifies your breath. You inhale slowly, savoring the trace aroma of roasted barley and honey from a nearby kitchen. Eunuchs often doubled as perfumers, blending native frankincense with imported musk to diffuse calming scents throughout the palace. You continue along a mosaic-tiled floor, each piece a tiny island of color, forming patterns that resemble swirling rivers. The eunuchs' footsteps remain silent. Their padded slippers muffle any hint of arrival. It's said that some eunuchs trained to move so stealthily that they could snatch a coin from a courtesan's slipper without her awareness, though surviving records on this claim are scant. Historians still argue whether these tales reflect actual skills or later embellishments, meant to elevate their mythical status. Ahead, you see a carved stone basin filled with cool water, set beneath a domed alcove. A single eunuch stands vigil, his back straight, hands tucked into wide sleeves, eyes fixed on the flicker of flame reflected in the water's surface. This was no mere night watch. It was a ritual of purification, both literal and spiritual. Eunuchs performed this right before assuming duties near the emperor, clearing any lingering thoughts of personal ambition. You step forward, imagining the clink of metal hairpins and the rustle of silk robes as other attendants ready themselves for dawn's audience. The corridor narrows, funneling you toward massive bronze doors studded with lion-head knockers. Beyond them lies the inner court of limits to everyone but the emperor, his family, and the highest-ranking eunuchs. But for now, you linger in this threshold, heart pounding in quiet reverence. Your senses sharpen, the faint echo of flutes, the hush of distant laughter, the subtle warmth radiating from the torches. You feel perched between world's guest and intruder, observer and participant. Patrolling eunuchs flicker in and out of sight like gentle phantoms, each step a reminder of the delicate balance these servants maintain between power and invisibility. And as you stand here, you realize that in this place, silence itself was the greatest weapon. You slip through a narrow postern gate into a quieter wing of the palace, where the polished floors grow slick with incense haze. Here, in this secretive alcove lined with alabaster pillars, the story of how Abyssinian kings first enlisted eunuchs unfolds like a tattered scroll. Imagine a time around the 4th century CE, when the kingdom of Axum, Ethiopia's ancient powerhouse, traded ivory and gold for exotic wares across the Red Sea. It's a mainstream fact that Axumite rulers maintained intricate diplomatic ties with Byzantium and India, and it's likely in these bustling ports where the idea of court eunuchs first drifted ashore. Some historians still argue whether the initial practice was homegrown or borrowed wholesale from Byzantine palaces. That debate glows as warmly as the torches in these corridors. You approach a low wooden platform carved with geometric motifs. Here, chronicles say Emperor Azana might have stationed eunuchs to guard royal treasures. These men, castrated in their youth, would be bound by both custom and keloid scars, proof of their sacrifice. Their altered bodies ensured they bore no dynastic ambitions, a key reassurance in a world where lineage meant everything. You probably won't survive the ritual of selecting new recruits, of course, which involved neither tea nor biscuits but bone-chilling vows sworn beneath oaken beams. Joke 1. Let's just say the hair-raising part wasn't the oath itself. As you lean against a pillar, you notice a small clay jar painted with bull silhouettes. It once held a peculiar blend of frankincense and crushed emeralds, an alchemical concoction eunuchs used to trace invisible ink on palace documents. That's your quirky tidbit. Invisible ink correspondence passed between eunuchs and emissaries, hiding state secrets in plain sight. Codices recovered near Aksum reportedly contained faint green script that only revealed itself under candlelight. Historians still argue whether these manuscripts were genuine or clever forgeries created by rival kingdoms. Drifting further, you spy a series of frescoes along the wall, vivid scenes of camel caravans and winged lions. One panel depicts a nobleman handing over a trembling boy to a robed eunuch, symbolizing the early recruitment process. The child's eyes glint with fear and curiosity as he takes his first steps into service. You can almost feel the rough wool of his tunic and the dull ache of his thigh-length leather straps. Those straps, by the way, were rumored to bear hidden pockets stuffed with spices meant to disguise the scent of his origins and improvised cover identity. In case he ever strayed beyond imperial view, a faint breeze rustles the frescoes, carrying a scent of roasted teff and shea butter. You catch whispers of an origin story linking these eunuchs to Nubian envoys, black-garbed courtiers famed for negotiating ivory deals. Some fringe scholars propose that early Ethiopian eunuchs were actually captives from nearby kingdoms, sold or gifted into service. Others claim they volunteered, seeking a path to power and privilege in a rigidly hierarchical society. Historians still argue whether coercion or ambition drove the first castrations. You picture a young recruit, his voice trembling like a reed in the wind, reciting solemn mantras beneath an ebony canopy. A learned priest intones blessings from the Book of Enoch, a mainstream fact. Since Ethiopia's adoption of Christianity in the 4th century brought Semitic liturgies into the royal court, the new eunuch, chest-bound by linen, would step forward, offering his future in exchange for trust and access. Joke 2. Definitely not the typical all-access backstage pass you'd expect. Moving on, you notice an ivory comb laid out on a velvet cushion. Local legend says eunuchs used tusk combs carved from elephant ivory to maintain elaborate hairstyles. Some even dyed their hair with henna to match palace tapestries. It's a delightful oddity that eunuchs once competed in silent hair competitions, judged solely by texture and shine. Joke 3. Because nothing screams high stakes like a good blow-dry. In this hushed hall, you sense the weight of political calculation. Abyssinian kings saw eunuchs as ideal gatekeepers of dynastic secrets. Their unique gender status prevented them from fathering claimants to the throne. Yet eunuchs also wielded soft power, navigating palace gossip, escorting foreign envoys and whispering counsel to the emperor. The earliest records from the 6th century mention Abbot Melam, a eunuch credited with preserving sacred texts during a siege of Axum. Whether Melam was a real figure or the product of later hagiography remains a point scholars still debate. You pause by a series of sealed bronze chests, each bearing a lion's headlock. These contained imperial decrees, treaties, and, according to rumor, a secret recipe for honeyed wine used exclusively at royal banquets. Legend claims that only eunuchs knew the precise ratio of dates, spices, and fermented teff. That recipe was so coveted that some eunuchs allegedly carried vials of it sewn into their tunics. As you proceed, the corridor walls narrow and the frescoes shift from grand historical narratives to intimate vignettes. A eunuch teaching geometry to a princess, under a jacaranda tree, another mixing ointments for the emperor's sore throat after ritual fasts. These everyday scenes remind you that eunuchs were not mere sentinels, but integral to courtly life. Their ancestors may have been introduced to Gondor through exotic ports, but over time, their role evolved into a uniquely Ethiopian institution. You brush a fingertip against a mural depicting a ceremony at the church of Debre Birhan Selassie, where eunuchs once bore gilded crosses in the annual festival. This link between church and court underscores how deeply woven eunuchs were into Ethiopia's spiritual fabric. It's a mainstream fact that Gondorian rulers commissioned elaborate church murals in the 17th century, many of which still survive today. But did eunuchs carry the crosses out of devotion or duty? Historians still argue whether their religious roles were voluntary expressions of faith or enforced tokens of imperial control. A stray beam of moonlight flickers across a carved relief of a pair of crossed sword, symbols of military might. Early eunuchs occasionally served as battlefield heralds, carrying messages from the front lines to the imperial palace. One account describes a eunuch sprinting barefoot across scorched earth to deliver news of victory, his heart pounding with solemn pride. It's a quirky anecdote that illustrates their occasional proximity to violence, despite their non-combatant status. Now you stand before a large wooden doorway inlaid with mother of pearl. Beyond it lies the inner sanctum where the emperor's youngest son once tested falcons, and other reminder that eunuchs were guardians of the imperial family's most private rituals. But here, in these threshold spaces, the origins of their caste feel most tangible. You sense the centuries layering around you, each generation passing the baton of trust, secrecy, and quiet authority. As you linger, you realize that the institution of court eunuchs in Ethiopia did not spring from a single moment, but from a confluence of trade, religion, and political necessity. Borrowed influences mingled with homegrown traditions to forge a class of men uniquely positioned between power and servitude. It's an origin story as intricate as the ivory combs once used to groom them, threaded with intrigue, devotion, and whispered debates that echo in these very halls. You step back into the corridor's dim light, the frescoed walls receding as if to let you breathe. The silent eunuchs pass by, their eyes straight ahead, lips pressed in discreet composure. In their presence you feel the weight of countless secret sanctioned treaties, hidden manuscripts, and clandestine recipes locked behind both bronze chests and unspoken vows. And as you move on to the next wing of the palace, you carry with you the knowledge that the origins of these court eunuchs lie not only in political calculus but in the delicate interplay of culture, faith, and human ambition. You follow a flickering torch down a narrow hallway into the palace's inner courtyard, where a raised dais draped in crimson cloth awaits under a canopy of olive and juniper branches. The air is hushed, but electric, a careful anticipation that prickles your skin like the first drops of a summer rainstorm. This is where the sacred training rituals for newly arrived eunuchs unfold. Ceremonies designed to transform frightened boys into unflappable palace confidants. You might imagine a quick lesson in dusting off royal sandals, but instead you're about to witness rites that blend spiritual purification, martial discipline, and strict etiquette in equal measure. First, recruits kneel on cool marble tiles, in front of a circle of elder eunuchs, each one dressed in flowing robes of ivory and indigo, a mainstream fact here. By the 17th century, Gondor's court training included formal instruction in Amharic calligraphy, geometry, and hymnody, subjects once reserved for scribes and clergy. You probably won't survive this intense memorization test if you've ever struggled through high school algebra. But these novices recite intricate prayers and ledger-keeping formulas from memory under candlelight. Joke 1. No cheat sheets allowed, just your wits and a dry throat. Next, the ceremony moves into the alchemical chamber, where incense smoke curls through latticed windows and mingles with the acrid temps of heated metal. Here eunuch mentors teach recruits to forge their own ceremonial medallions using soft metals, bronze stamped with imperial seals. Some fringe sources claim that these medallions were secretly inscribed with a safety rune thought to ward off evil spirits. You might spot tiny symbols resembling bird tracks around the rims. Historians still argue whether these runic marks were genuine protective charms or later additions by souvenir hunters aiming to spice up their tales. After metalwork, you're led to a low platform lined with cushions, where a solemn priest anoints each recruit with consecrated water from the river Tech. The water is chilled by mountain runoff and carries a faint mineral taste that reminds you of biting into a green grape. As droplets bead on their scalps, the novice eunuchs feel themselves leaving behind childhood fears. You slide your hand over the carved edge of the platform, running your fingertips across hieroglyph-like patterns in relief, evidence that this same structure was used for royal baptisms centuries earlier. Now, the recruits must prove their discipline through martial exercises. You step back as they don lightweight leather tunics and practice fluid, dance-like movements with wooden staves, a mainstream fact. Eunuchs in Gondor are often trained in non-lethal martial arts, combining Ethiopian stick-fighting techniques and borrowed Persian footwork to develop both grace and stamina. One curious detail: a few trainees wear anklets filled with tiny iron pellets that rattle softly, testing their ability to move stealthily. The slightest misstep betrays them with a tattletale clink. Joke 2, like Santa's naughty or nice tracker, but decidedly less festive. Once exhausted, the recruits are ushered into a fragrant pavilion lined with stacks of dried herbs, lavender, rue, and Ethiopian myrtle. Here, elder eunuchs demonstrate the art of blending apothecary concoctions used to soothe royal headaches or mask unpleasant odors in banquet halls. One quirky tidbit: some eunuchs once mixed ash from burned frankincense trees into ointments, believing it amplified their voices when reading proclamations aloud. Whether it worked or simply smelled excruciatingly smoky is a question still debated in hushed academic circles. Historians still argue whether these ash-infused bombs were effective or merely palace legend. As night deepens, the final rite unfolds by a moonlit pool fed by distant mountain springs. Each recruit must remove his linen cap and stand chest-high in the water, where a senior eunuch recites psalms in Gs, the ancient liturgical language of Ethiopian Christianity. The water reflects the silver moon and dancing shadows of palm fronds overhead. You hear the gentle lapping of water against stone as chants rise and fall, a lullaby for the newly anointed. A mainstream fact: these purification baths were believed to not only cleanse the body but also to symbolically wash away any personal desires that might conflict with court duties. When the bath ends, recruits wrap themselves in soft cloth and recline on benches of carved teak, eyes heavy from the evening's trials. An elder slides a small amber-hued token into each novice's hand, a disc carved with the emperor's image and enameled with cobalt. This token grants limited access to palace quarters and marks their official status as eunuch. You notice tiny chips around the edges of some discs, suggesting they were well worn during secret inspections and midnight errands. It's a quiet reminder that these boys now are being entrusted with absolute discretion. Finally, beneath a vaulted dome, all trainees gather for a silent vow. You can barely hear the collective inhale before they whisper in unison, "For the Emperor, I surrender my name." There's no spotlight or grand proclamation, just the soft echo of voices in a hushed chorus. One fringe account tells of eunuchs who refused this vow until they received assurances of lifelong provisions for their families, claim that may owe more to romanticized memoirs than court records. Historians still argue whether family support was standard or a rare concession by merciful rulers. As the ceremony closes, lanterns are lit around the courtyard's perimeter, casting warm pools of light on the recruits' fatigued faces. You step into the glowing ring and feel an almost magnetic pull toward the center, as if the palace itself is inviting you to bear witness. For these men, today marks both an end and a beginning, the end of personal histories and the beginning of lives lived in service to the crown. Your chest tightens with reverence as you watch the freshly minted eunuchs, now bound by oaths, rituals, and tokens, file toward the palace's inner chambers. Their eyes glint with newfound purpose, and you imagine the countless secrets they will soon safeguard. A lone lute player strums a gentle melody, the notes drifting upward like prayer smoke, who remain rooted to the spot, absorbing the weight of tradition, devotion, and whispered debates that have shaped this caste for centuries. With that, the ceremony dissolves into the night, leaving only the soft rustle of robes and the lingering aroma of heated metal and jasmine. You step away, the echo of vows still humming in your mind, ready to follow these eunuchs deeper into the palace's hidden heart. You slip behind a heavy silk curtain so soft it seems to sigh beneath your fingertips, entering a dimly lit antechamber where the air hangs thick with rosewater mist. The walls here are draped in tapestries depicting courtly scenes, ladies in kirtles strolling through jasmine gardens, servants bearing platters of spiced honey cakes. You probably won't survive a month in this hush. No smartphone beeps, no gossiping cousins' laughter, but let's dive in anyway. This is the sacred precinct of the royal harem, and here eunuchs stand sentinel as sworn guardians whose vow of silence and loyalty shields the imperial women from prying eyes. A mainstream fact: in 17th century Gondor, the harem, known locally as the Kittestbet, or women's house, housed the emperor's wives, daughters, and concubines, and only eunuchs were permitted inside its carved cedar doors. You inhale the faint scent of ambergris and saffron drifting from a recessed brazier, mingling with the sweet musk of sandalwood floors buffed to a dull sheen. Every step you take in these tiled chambers seems to amplify the hush, as though sound itself fears intrusion. Before you stands Tisfa, a high-ranking eunuch whose broad shoulders are draped in a tunic woven with gold threads. His lips are pressed into a gentle line, and his eyes glint with calm authority. He holds a keyring of slender bronze keys, each one stamped with a different seal, one for the private bathhouse, another for the queen's chamber, and a third for the hidden chest where love letters from foreign envoys were said to lie. Jokes aside, these keys represented literal power, granting Tisfa discretion over life and privacy. Joke 1. It's like he had the royal Airbnb host app installed in his brain, except with less Wi-Fi. You notice the eunuchs communicate almost entirely through gestures and hushed signals. A fringe detail: Some eunuchs reportedly used a secret finger language, known only within their order combinations of knuckle taps and thumb flicks so precise that even a dropped earring would become urgent news. Historians still argue whether this silent semaphore was widespread or a later romantic invention by court chroniclers seeking to embellish their tales. You trace a subtle wrist twist from Tisfay, and a younger eunuch named Bekel pads forward with a tray of polished alabaster cups filled with rose honey tea. You lift a cup, feeling the warmth seep into your palms. The tea tastes of sweet petals and faint bitterness like a lullaby with a sharp edge. As you sip, Tisfay beckons you toward an ebony console carved with scenes of Solomon's court, a reminder of Ethiopia's deep Judeo-Christian influences. You can almost hear the whisper of linen robes, the shuffle of velvet slippers. The eunuch's life here is part monk's vow, part royal watchdog. They swear oaths and gs beneath starlit domes, pledging silent guardianship over the women whose laughter and tears echo only within these secluded walls. When the harem's private library shelves wedged with leather-bound tomes and illuminated manuscripts, you glimpse scrolls of poetry penned by the emperor himself. Only eunuchs could retrieve these texts for the queen's midnight study sessions. A quirky anecdote: one 18th century record mentions a eunuch reading aloud upside down to entertain a princess. Rumor says because he misread which side was up, proof that even solemn guardians can trip over their own reverence. Joke 2. Imagine Amazon reviews complaining, read upside down, and 2 stars. Hard to follow. You step through a slender arch into a garden courtyard hidden from the main palace grounds. Here, jasmine vines climb trellises, and a marble fountain trickles so softly it might be your own heartbeat. The harem's folk often gathered here at dusk, attended by eunuchs who ensured no unwanted guests slipped past. The atmosphere is hushed yet intimate. You sense the weight of countless confidences shared beneath perfumed arches. Historically, eunuchs in Gondor acted as both chaperones and cultural tutors, introducing courtly etiquette and foreign fashions to the imperial women. It's a mainstream fact that they taught French embroidery techniques imported via Jesuit missionaries in the 1600s. You notice a pair of ornate silk slippers on a stone bench, left behind by a princess during her evening promenade. Tisfay nods discreetly, then signals Bekel to wrap them in a white cloth. These slippers will be returned discreetly before dawn. The precision here is so exact you'd think they owned a silent Swiss watch factory. Historians still argue whether eunuchs enjoyed any personal freedoms within harem walls or lived in near total constraint behind velvet drapes. Some sources paint a life of quiet luxury. Others hint at loneliness so deep it echoed louder than any forbidden laughter. Now you're guided into the queen's inner salon, where plush cushions ring a low table strewn with citrus fruits and candied ginger. The queen seats herself on a raised dais, flanked by lady attendants, while 2 eunuchs stand sentinel at her sides, posture as straight as cypress trees. Their silence radiates respect and a subtle warning that any misstep here could cost more than just a misplaced foot on a velvet cushion. These guardians learn to read gestures as fluently as any scribal code, a slight bow meaning all is well, a stiff back signaling danger nearby. A fringe rumor: some eunuchs occasionally composed secret poetry expressing unspoken yearnings, hiding verses within clothing folds for the queen to find. Whether those love poems ever reached the royal eyes is hotly debated by scholars, to still argue whether any such verses were genuine or clever forgeries by ambitious poets seeking patronage. You imagine Bekel slipping a folded verse into a hem, heart pounding like war drums. Joke 3. Sneaking poetry is way more dramatic than sneaking midnight snacks, right? As you sip another cup of rose honey tea, you sense the weight of the eunuch's loyalty pressing around you like the finest brocade. They guard not just doors and secrets but the emotional well-being of the harem's inhabitants. When anxiety flutters through the corridors over political coups or rumors of famine, these silent sentinels become emotional anchors, a reassuring presence amidst palace turmoil. They escort the queen's daughters to their Quranic studies, translate French plays for amusement, and even played chamber music on tiny lyres engraved with their personal seals outside. The sky undulates from mauve to indigo as night deepens. The eunuchs exchange no words, but a shared nod passes between them with the solemnity of a high priest's blessing. You feel oddly comforted by their unspoken code, a reminder that sometimes silence speaks louder than the grandest proclamation. The hush here is alive, vibrating through the velvet curtains and oil lamp glow. As you slip back through the silk drapery into the broader palace corridors, you carry with you an understanding of how eunuchs balance discretion and devotion. Their vow of silence wasn't just practical, it was spiritual, a living promise etched into every gesture, every key turned in a heavy lock. In this delicate dance, they became the invisible heart of the harem, beating softly behind layers of cloth and courtly ceremony. You step onto polished stone, the distant echo of a lute trill floating toward you like a breath. Behind you, Tisfay and Bekel remain still as statues, eternal guardians in a world built on secrets and silk. And as you move on to the next corridor, you can't help but appreciate that here, silence itself is an art form, curated by those who dedicated their very voices to the service of the crown. You slip past a pair of ornately carved ebony doors into the palace's most secret chamber, the treasury vault where the emperor's sacred regalia lies under torchlight's wary glow. The air here feels cooler, as if the walls themselves are breathing out centuries of guarded secrets. Your footsteps sound unnaturally loud against the stone floor, though you know that the eunuchs responsible for these treasures move with studied silence, each step measured to avoid even the slightest jangle. You glide forward, imagining the weight of gold and gemstones pressing against velvet linings a mainstream fact. Since 17th century chroniclers record that Emperor Fazlide's crown alone contained over 500 carats of emeralds, rubies, and sapphires, set in pure gold. A single eunuch stands in the center of the vault, robes trimmed with crimson silk, holding a long-handled ebony tray. His name is Mesfin, and his eyes gleam with solemn focus as he lays out a cushion of deep blue velvet. You realize that this chamber is more than a storehouse, it's a sanctum of ritual. Each piece of regalia must pass through precise protocols before touching imperial flesh. You probably won't survive a misstep here, of course, because even a fingerprint out of place could spark suspicion of theft or betrayal. Joke 1. And you thought losing your house keys was traumatic. First, Mesfin withdraws a slender box, lined in olive green brocade. Inside rests the imperial scepter, crowned with a large topaz carved in the shape of a lion's head. With gloved hands, he lifts it, then hands it to the next eunuch. Lulu stands beside a low bronze basin, half filled with perfumed water. Most palace servants would simply buff metal with cloth, but eunuchs perform a ceremonial cleansing. Topaz dips briefly in water infused with frankincense and myrrh to banish impurities, both literal and spiritual. It's said that this ritual dates back to Aksumite traditions wherein regalia were consecrated in church before coronations. Historians still argue whether the cleansing rites borrowed Christian liturgies or indigenous animist customs that predated Ethiopia's conversion to Christianity. That as the scepter emerges, beads of perfumed water drip like glints of morning dew. Mesfin carefully places it on the velvet cushion, then steps back to admire its shimmer under torchlight. You can almost taste the musky temps in the air, the combination of incense and warmed metal, a sensory echo of royal power. Nearby, a small brass brazier puffs out fragrant smoke. It burns a peculiar blend of dried marjoram and crushed tailor's chalk, a quirk of the Gondorian court said to heighten the brilliance of gemstones during cleaning. Some fringe sources claim they also use ground ostrich feathers to buff subtle flaws in the goldwork, though surviving records are scant. Next, Luelle opens a heavy oak chest, reinforced with iron bands and lion head handles. Inside, nestled in blood-red silk, lies the ceremonial sword, its scabbard encrusted with mother-of-pearl inlays and filigree filaments of silver. You watch as he draws it slowly, the steel gleaming like liquid moonlight. A mainstream fact: swords were among the most prized items in the Solomonic regalia, symbolizing both divine right and martial prowess, and were often gifted by foreign dignitaries as tokens of alliance. Scholars still argue whether specific blades belonged originally to Persian shahs or European monarchs. Since some gemstones match known foreign workshops, Luelle presents the sword to Mesfin, who inspects every inch with a jeweler's loupe. His gloved fingers press gently against the hilt, feeling for dents, hairline cracks, or loose stones. If any irregularity appears, the protocol demands immediate replacement with a stored duplicate, another sword hidden behind a false panel in the vault wall. You imagine such paranoia, the thought that a simple scratch could precipitate a palace investigation. Eunuchs interrogating eunuchs in hushed tones to root out saboteurs. Joke 2. You'd think they'd just install plexiglass once approved. The sword is placed beside the scepter on the velvet cushion. Mesfin steps aside, and two junior eunuchs carefully wrap the regalia in a fine linen cloth coated with beeswax and ground turmeric, mixture believed to repel tarnish and insects. You recognize turmeric's deep gold hue from mustard on your breakfast toast, but here it serves as a preservation agent, its antiseptic qualities woven into palace lore. Historians still argue whether the yellow stain was purely functional or chosen for its symbolic resonance with the sun god motif in Ethiopian royal iconography. Your eyes drift to a row of smaller boxes, each labeled in delicate GS script. One box contains the royal orb, globe of crystal encased in gold bands adorned with tiny emeralds. Another holds a pair of silver spurs embossed with the emperor's crown. Beneath glass covers, diadems glitter like captured stars. The atmosphere hums with the weight of history and silent vows. Mesfin motions you closer, and you notice minute notches carved on the velvet cushions, marks indicating the precise location for each jewel. These indentations serve as guides, ensuring that every piece sits exactly where it belongs. You probably won't survive if you jostle a gem even a quarter-inch off center. The palace's master of ceremonies logs such deviations in his nightly report. This obsession with exact placement echoes the meticulous geometries of Gondorian architecture, where every angle and ratio carries meaning. Nearby, a slender bronze lantern hangs from a chain, its flame sheltered by a hood. This lantern, you learn, burns a specially formulated oil sesame scented with lavender and crushed beetroot dye to give the flame a faint purple hue. The effect softens the shine of metals, allowing the eunuchs to spot micro-abrasions that standard light would miss. It's a quirky tidbit you won't find in every palace guide, only whispered among vault attendants late at night, once all items are cleaned, checked, and wrapped. Mesfin consults a leather-bound ledgebook embossed with the imperial crest. He flips through pages filled with meticulous entries: date, time, attending eunuchs' names, and even marginal notes about ambient temperature and humidity. These logs were so detailed that later archivists used them to reconstruct historical weather patterns in Gondor. Historians still argue whether these logs were initially intended for meteorological purposes or simply obsessive record-keeping. After the final entry, Mesfin closes the ledgebook and locks it in a small safe embedded in the vault wall. He hands the master key, a broad iron bar etched with the emperor's monogram to Beckel, a young eunuch whose knuckles whiten as he grips it. This key unlocks the outer vault, from which regalia are retrieved only on imperial occasions, coronations, state visits, or great Timcat festivals. On most days, the regalia remains here, untouched and unseen, their power amplified by absence. As you step back, your eyes linger on the array of treasures: scepter, sword, orb, spurs, all symbols of a monarchy that fused Solomonic legend with African sovereignty. You sense how these objects embody more than regal pomp. They encapsulate trust, devotion, and the quiet vigilance of eunuchs who devote their lives to safeguarding a legacy. You drift out of the vault, the heavy doors closing behind you with a muted thud. The corridors beyond buzz with distant activity servants preparing ritual blankets for the next audience, musicians tuning lyres in anticipation of dawn's ceremonies. Yet here, behind those ebony doors, time stands still. The treasure chamber remains a silent testament to the eunuch's unwavering diligence. A world where silence is the greatest oath and the smallest gesture can shift the balance of power. You slip into a hush-draped antechamber just off the grand hall, where the marble floor absorbs every footstep, and the scent of aged cedar lingers like a whispered secret. Here the eunuchs transform from silent sentinels into confidants in political intrigue, human conduits of rumor and counsel. You probably won't survive one slip-up in this world of half-spoken truths and coded glances, but for now, you're an invisible observer, perched at the edge of velvet drapes as the palace's most discreet messengers go to work. Mainstream fact. By the late 17th century, Gondor's court was a hotbed of factional plotting, with nobles marshalling alliances over coffee ceremonies. Eunuchs, unencumbered by familial loyalties, were ideally positioned to convey sensitive intelligence between rival camps. You imagine them carrying messages sealed in slender bamboo tubes tucked inside ornate hairpins, each one light enough to hide beneath a high bun. Joke 1. If only bureaucrats today could sneak memos in hair accessories, board meetings might be a lot more interesting. You slip closer, resting your palm against a carved mahogany pillar, to mid-ranking eunuchs Minyahil and Alamea who stand beneath a fresco of angels in flight. Their robes are a muted charcoal, blending into the shadow pools cast by flickering oil lamps. With gloved fingers, Minyahil traces an invisible line in the air, his version of Morse code, and Alamea who leans in, nodding as he decodes each tap. That silent semaphore was rumored to be so elaborate that it could signify not only raise taxes but also your favorite concubine fancies you. Historians still argue whether this sophisticated finger language ever existed or was a later, romantic invention by palace chroniclers seeking flair. You breathe in the smoky aroma of charred birch torches, a reminder of the crocodile dung sunscreen fiasco you heard about in the northern stables. Remember that story? Callback, crocodile dung sunscreen. Legend says eunuchs advised stable hands to slather the vile mixture on horses during sunlit processions, but no reliable source confirms anyone actually wore it. Yet here in the palace, you sense that half of intrigue is the scent of rumor itself. Minyahil reaches into his wide sleeve and produces a folded scrap of parchment, sealed with crimson wax bearing the emperor's emblem. With a swift flick, he breaks the seal and scans the contents. A report on troop movements near Lake Tana. He whispers a single phrase indistinct to you, but Alamea Hugh's eyebrows arch, and he strides toward a nearby door. His mission, delivered the update to Empress Maintwab's chamber before dawn's council. You follow at a respectful distance, the torchlight bobbing as you tread over mosaic tiles depicting Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. These tiles creak ever so slightly beneath your weight, betraying centuries of wear. Joke 2. You'd think they'd install do not creak signs, but where's the fun in that? The hush is thick enough to swallow your breath, but you can't help inhaling. Curiosity burns hotter than any ceremonial brazier as Alamea who disappears through a curtained archway. You pause by a lacquered console table. On it rests a silver ewer and basin for hand-washing before audiences, a reminder that cleanliness was ritualized even amid cloak and dagger politics. You dip a finger into the basin's cool water and taste faint traces of rose and myrrh. In occasions of acute intrigue, eunuchs sometimes added ground saffron to the basin, hoping its hue would reveal the slightest smudge of blood on documents, an early forensic gimmick, if you will. Scholars still debate whether saffron-dyed water was truly used this way or if the tale emerged from travelers' tall tales pushing on. You enter the Hall of Whispered Councils, a barrel-vaulted room lined with ebony panels carved into labyrinthine patterns. Shadows coil like sleeping serpents along the walls. Here, eunuchs cluster in small alcoves, trading fragments of news over hushed sips of honeyed coffee. Courtiers believe eunuchs' neutral status makes them both invaluable and dangerous. They can't found dynasties, but they can topple them through a well-timed disclosure ahead. You glimpse an ivory platform where Miran, a senior eunuch, stands before a semicircle of minor nobles. A candle's glow chips gold from his intricately braided hair, and his voice is a soft rasp, like leaves brushing over stone. You strain to hear but only catch a tantalizing phrase. The Portuguese envoy, Marin's audience hangs on. His every word, even the slight rustle of silk, seems amplified in this cavernous chamber. You slip behind a fluted column and watch as he reaches into his vest for a small wooden box. Inside lies a handful of tiger's eye beads, tokens once sent by a foreign ruler to curry favor. In the palace's rumor mill, these beads symbolize loyalties bought and sold. A quirky tidbit: some eunuchs wore matching beads on their robes to signal faction. Allegiance, a subtle fashion statement with political weight. Historians still argue whether these beaded adornments were common practice or isolated experiments by flamboyant courtiers. Another eunuch, Sahai, leans in to relay Miran's words to a waiting noblewoman perched on a velvet chaise. She jots down Marin's counsel in a leather-bound diary, decimal notations, diagrams of troop placements, and even crude sketches of fortified mountain passes. It's a vivid scene. Quills scratching on parchment, the hush of breath, the glint of candlelight on ink. You can almost feel the heat radiating from the brazier behind her. A sudden breeze rattles a stained glass window, slicing colored light across the polished floor. You shiver, though the hall is warm. The gust feels charged, as if portending a palace coup. You recall earlier legends of eunuch-led uprisings, brotherhoods turning on their imperial masters in muted rebellion. Those stories often dismissed as fringe lore, yet whispers still persist among scholars and servants. Historians still argue whether any substantial eunuch revolt truly unfolded or if it remained mere speculation. Minya Hill returns, breathless, and slips a sealed scroll under the carpet's edge, hidden from prying eyes. He straightens his robe and offers you a curt nod before melting into the shadows. You realize that in this world, the most powerful acts are the ones that go unnoticed, like a coin sliding into a pocket or a whispered truth buried beneath layers of courtesy. You step away from the column, leaving behind the labyrinth of intrigue. The corridor beyond hums with distant conversation and the clink of porcelain cups, mundane sounds contrasting sharply with the high-stakes whisper network you've just witnessed. The eunuch's sense of self-control, their mastery of nuance, turns rumor into currency more valuable than gold or ivory. As you drift back toward the grand hall, the scent of cedar and myrrh follows you like a loyal guard. Your ears ring with the echo of half-spoken sentences, and you marvel at how these silent agents could sway empires with a tilt of the head or a carefully chosen token. No sword needed, just a well-timed murmur in the right ear. Feeling the cool evening air brush your cheeks, you pause at the threshold of the grand hall. The torches flicker, casting playful shadows on the vaulted ceiling. You realize that in Gondor, power often passes not through open decree but through whispered intrigue orchestrated by eunuchs whose loyalty lies somewhere between crown and conscience. And as you step back into the softer corridors, you carry with you the hush of secrets, an invisible cloak woven by the palace's most discreet diplomats. You drift into a vaulted chamber perfumed with sandalwood smoke and the faint temps of beeswax polish, where eunuchs gather each dawn to rehearse the unspoken language of courtly etiquette. The air is still broken only by the soft tap of padded slippers on mosaic floors and the faint rustle of linen robes brushing polished columns. You probably won't survive judging yourself by these rituals. Imagine tripping over your own bow and accidentally insulting the emperor, but let's slip into their world. Anyway, at the room's center, 5 eunuchs line up before a gilded mirror embedded in the wall, its frame carved with Solomon's seal and stylized palm fronds. This mirror is not for vanity. It's a tool for perfecting posture. A mainstream fact in 18th century Gondor court protocol mandated that eunuchs master at least 20 distinct bows and curtsies to denote rank, occasion, and the recipient of respect. You feel your spine stiffen as you watch Beckel perform the crescent bow, stooping at precisely a 45-degree angle while keeping his back strata move as exacting as a compass drawing a perfect arc. You step closer, tracing the inlaid patterns of abalone and ebony at your feet. The eunuchs wear linen robes dyed in muted hues, soft amber, pale emerald, and dove grage color, signifying a specific office. Chamberlain, registrar, harem, guardian, and treasurer, a fringe detail. Some robes incorporate hidden pockets, sealed with narrow zippers of fine brass, a later innovation whispered to have been introduced by Italian tailors visiting in the 1690s. Historians still argue whether these stealth pockets were indeed used to smuggle messages or simply to hold mint lozenges for long ceremonies. You clear your throat quietly, of course, and focus on the eunuch's hands. In every gesture, fingers remain gracefully together. Thumbs never flare out, lest they appear brash. Mesvin raises his hand in a token of deference, extending his fingers toward the mirror's reflection, the palm tilted down at exactly 7 degrees. The precision is fetishistic. Even a 1-degree deviation could signal unintended disdain. Joke 1. You try this at home and you'd look like you're swatting invisible flies. Beside you, a low table holds a brass incense burner flanked by small flagons of rosewater and bitter almond extract. Each scent is employed to cue different audiences: rosewater for religious dignitaries, almond extract for foreign emissaries, and plain water for royal family members. Eunuchs practice spritzing themselves with the correct aroma before each bow to ensure their scent matches their salute. Scholars still debate whether these olfactory cues were truly standardized or simply later romantic additions to palace lore. The eunuchs then rehearse the silent step shuffle, a sequence of 5 measured foot slides designed to convey calm, authority. You notice tiny metal pellets in the hems of their robes, an echo of those anklets from Section 3, so that a stray clink alerts a trainer to missteps. This subtle feedback loop turns them into walking metronomes, each step as predictable as the ticking of a clock. Joke 2. If they ever auditioned for Swan Lake, they'd nail its distance, the perfect pirouette. You lean against a column and close your eyes, tuning into the nuanced symphony, the whisper of robes, the distant drip of water from a wall fountain, the zen-like rhythm of practiced bows. Each motion flows seamlessly into the next. Arc greeting, royal fan salute, subtle nod, palm forward acknowledgement, and finally kneeling crescent for the emperor's closest circle. By the end of this choreography, you feel oddly entranced, as though you've been initiated into a silent dance where every gesture carries centuries of meaning. A flicker of movement catches your eye. A junior eunuch named Abba silhouetted against an arched window. She practices a specialized curtsy reserved for the empress mantwab, involving a slight twist of the torso and a delicate hand flourish at heart level. You sense the weight behind this variation in Gondor's matrilineal influence. The empress wielded significant soft power, and eunuchs perfected her salute to honor both tradition and her personal grace. You slip forward as Beckel and Abba exchange glances, each recognizing a peer's flawless technique. Then, a hush falls as Mesvin resets the incense burner, scattering embers that spark tiny ghost lights in the fragrant haze. He invites you to join them. Tentatively, you mimic the crescent bow, sliding your feet and folding your hands at your midriff. Your bow falters. Halfway you catch yourself with a coffee at the eunuchs nod politely, as if forgiving your mortal clumsiness. Joke 3. At least they didn't confiscate your imaginary pocket knife. After the practice, the group moves to a raised dais where parchment scrolls list the day's audiences: the Patriarch of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, the Portuguese consul, and the emperor himself. Before each audience, eunuchs convene to confirm the correct bow variations. Even minor infractions like raising the palm to high could cause offense and necessitate a formal apology delivered in precisely framed words. The ceremonial apologies themselves followed exact formulas, another layer of etiquette you'll never master. You notice a small bench against the wall with cushions of woven waxed cotton, often called fidget cushions, ironically used to soothe nerves before public duties. Some eunuchs finger these cushions, rolling the tiny fibers between their fingers to calm fluttering hearts. Historians still argue whether these cushions were an official innovation of the Gondorian court or a later European import rumored to be carried by Jesuit priests. As the training winds down, the eunuchs bless themselves with quick signs of the crossed thumb, index, and middle finger touching before filing out in silent formation. You stand alone in the chamber, breathing calmly, the scent of sandalwood and rosewater mingling in your lungs. You realize that etiquette here is not mere pageantry but a subtle architecture of power, constructing respect through form and rhythm. Stepping into the corridor beyond, you feel lighter yet strangely hollow, as though you've shed your everyday self for a moment. The eunuch's bowed heads and measured footsteps fade into the distance, leaving you with the echo of practiced silence. And as you follow the mosaic path lined with stylized eagles, you carry with you the memory of gestures, sharper than swords, and a sense that in Gondor's palace, true authority flowed not from a raised voice but from perfect, unspoken poise. You drift into a wide, pillared courtyard just before dawn, where the first pale light seeps through arched colonnades, painting the stone floor in soft pastels. Here, the palace's eunuchs transform into musicians, their silent discipline giving way too measured, rhythmic motion as they lead ceremonial processions before the emperor's throne. You probably won't survive trying to keep up with their drumbeats. Your Fitbit would revolt, but let's settle in and savor the gentle pulse of this musical ritual. Amainstream. Fact: in 17th and 18th century Gondor court eunuchs often doubled as professional musicians, mastering traditional Ethiopian instruments like the kaboro double-headed drum and the masenko one-stringed fiddle to accompany royal ceremonies. You hear the deep thump-thump of the kibro first, a heartbeat in sync with your own, followed by the plaintive drone of the masenko echoing through the colonnade. Joke 1. If Spotify had a Gondorian Vibes playlist, this would be track 1. The eunuch drummers stand into precise ranks, each drum slung low at their hips, painted in crimson and gold that catch the dawn's glow as you step closer. You catch the scent of smoked frankincense, a callback to that sulphurous incense chamber in Section 3 mingling with dewy grass from the palace gardens beyond. The air hums softly, and the first drummer raises his sticks, palms open like lily pads waiting for rain. On cue, every stick meets skin in perfect unison, sending a gentle reverberation through your chest. It's as if the palace itself is breathing. A fringe detail. Some eunuchs reportedly soaked their drumheads in a mild solution of honey and water to tighten the hide and produce a warmer tone. A trick whispered among veteran musicians but never officially documented. Historians still argue whether this honey treatment was widespread or a backstage secret kept by master drummers. You watch as two eunuchs at the front unfurl long silk banners embroidered with Solomon's seal and imperial crests, their robes muted teal for the left flank. Dusky rose for the right flow behind them in gentle waves, like koi swimming through air. The banners catch the breeze, creating an undulating canvas that ripples to the drum's cadence. Joke 2. If a wind machine existed back then, it was probably just another eunuch with a big fan. Next, the Masenko players step forward. Each holds their slender bow strung with horsehair at a near vertical angle. As they draw it across the single string, the notes sing out, a sweet, mournful call that tugs at your memory of jasmine courtyards in Section 4. The combination of Kibro and Masenko creates a dialogue between earth and sky. The drum's low rumble converses with the fiddle's high wail. You feel the sonic texture like velvet brushing against your earlobes. A column of flute players emerges next. Their reed pipes carved from bamboo and tipped with metal. You inhale the breathy, airy tones, imagining each note as a gentle wind. Chime stirring leaves. A quirky anecdote. Some eunuchs liked to add a tiny bead inside their flute's mouthpiece. Legend says it created a subtle rattling echo that helped mask any off-key mistakes during long ceremonies. Whether true or mere palace gossip remains a matter historians still argue about, but it adds a human touch to the polished procession. As the ensemble moves forward, you notice their formation. Drums in front, banners flanking, string instruments in the middle, and flutes trailing behind an acoustic funnel directed toward the throne room. Every step is measured. Left foot, right foot, pause, each pause, allowing the music to breathe before resuming. You feel it in your bones, a rhythmic lullaby coaxing you deeper into the palace's hidden heart. You sink onto a low stone bench against a pillar, letting the music wash over you. The courtyard's polished floor reflects the eunuch silhouettes, creating twin images that sway like shadow puppets. The ancient columns echo the Kaboros pulse, giving the sound a cathedral-like resonance. Joke 3. It's like surround sound, Gondorian edition. No electronics required. Midway through the procession, the eunuch musicians pause beneath an ornate archway carved with falcons and lotus blossoms. Here the lead drummer taps a complex prelude, a 5-beat pattern known as Becca 2 in local parlance. This pattern introduces subsequent shifts in rhythm, guiding the ensemble through 3 distinct movements: invocation, tribute, and benediction. A mainstream fact. These movements corresponded to stages of the imperial audience welcoming the emperor, presenting dignitaries, and concluding with blessings. Historians still argue whether these musical forms were standardized across the realm or varied from palace to palace. During the invocation, you notice the banners dip momentarily, as if bowing to the music itself. The eunuch flutists lean into their pipes, coaxing elongated notes that trail off like wisps of smoke. In this moment, time seems to pause. You catch a glimpse of Mesfin from Section 5 standing near the throne steps. His posture is straight as a sentinel's spear. The music acknowledges his presence, lowering in volume before swelling again. Moving into the tribute, the Masenko players shift to a staccato rhythm, the strings' vibrations sounding almost like laughter trapped in a bottle at the same time. The drums transition to a steadier, march-like beat, underscoring the presentation of gifts: ivory caskets glittering with spices, rare silks folded beneath crimson cloths, and ceremonial daggers etched with Solomonic script. In your mind's eye, you see the eunuchs from Section 6 slipping scrolls between these gifts, an unseen narrative carried alongside the tangible offerings. As the benediction begins, the ensemble converges on a final unified rhythm. The drums slow, the strings soften, and the flutes spiral upward into a single, pure note that lingers like a distant bell. You feel the hush settle around the courtyard, the music dissolving into the cool morning air. The banners hang motionless, the flutes rest against musicians' robes, and the drums' hollow corpses echo once before silence reclaims the space. The emperor himself emerges from behind bronze doors, regal and unhurried, his gaze tracing the silent arc of the procession's end. He nods slightly, the gesture met by a collective bow, a kneeling crescent from Section 7 before the eunuchs fall back, flanking him as he ascends stone steps toward the inner hall. You realize this entire procession, with its precise choreography and immersive soundscape, is less about spectacle and more about orchestrating power through rhythm and ritual. You rise, dusting off your robe, and step forward to follow the emperor's path. The courtyard's columns retreat behind you, and the distant hush of music gives way to the soft murmur of courtiers assembling. As you pass Mesfin, he offers the slightest of nods and unspoken acknowledgement that you've borne witness to their art. The eunuch's melodies blend reverence and intimacy, crafting an auditory tapestry that holds both the weight of tradition and the thrill of subtle innovation. Outside the throne room's threshold, you pause, savoring the memory of drum beats fading into silence. In this land of torchlit stones and whispered vows, the eunuch's music remains a vital thread binding past to present, servant to sovereign, and you to this unfolding story. And as you step beyond the archway, the soft echo of Masenko strings continues to resonate in your mind, lulling you ever closer to a state of restful wonder. You slip through a low, arched doorway into a chamber heavy with the scent of crushed herbs and simmering broths, where eunuchs double as palace apothecaries, blending remedies in the hushed glow of oil lamps. The air feels thick as if each inhalation collects a memory of soot and spice on your tongue. You probably won't survive a single day in this room. You'd sneeze yourself into oblivion, but for now, let's inhale deeply and discover the herbal lore of these silent healers. Mastered dot along one wall. Earthenware jars laden with parchment labels stand in neat rows, their contents ranging from powdered myrrh to dried hyssop sprigs. A mainstream fact, by the 18th century, Gondor's court employed eunuchs trained in both traditional Ethiopian and imported Arabic medicine, combining knowledge from the church's monastic scriptoria with treatises brought by Muslim scholars. From Aden and Cairo, you spot a jar labeled rue, in finelli, ground powder known locally as harmel, once used to calm nerves before royal audiences. In the center of the room, two eunuchs kneel over a large copper cauldron bubbling with amber liquid. Their tunics puff outward at the sleeves, revealing sleeves rolled back to expose forearms tattooed with incantations and jiyas. These tattoos aren't mere decoration. They serve as mnemonic devices, each symbol recalling a specific remedy or dosage, a fringe detail. Some eunuchs reportedly decorated their skin with tiny dots of turmeric mixed into the tattoo ink, believing it boosted the ink's potency and longevity. Historians still argue whether these medicinal tattoos were widespread practice or confined to a secretive brotherhood of senior healers. You approach the cauldron and catch a waft of its bittersweet aroma, honeyed fenugreek, blended with frankincense tears and a pinch of saffron threads. The eunuch on the right nesters slowly with a carved olive-wood spoon, her knuckles dusted yellow, while the other yet scrapes the sides to prevent scorching. Their movements are rhythmic, almost martial, reflecting another mainstream fact. Eunuch apothecaries in Gondor studied in formal schools where chemistry lessons blended seamlessly with martial discipline training. You imagine novices flinching as they handle potent alkaloids like strychnine under strict supervision, though these poisons were rarely used except in court investigations. Joke 1. Nothing says trustworthy like a healer who can also brew a lethal cup of tea. Sene ladles a small amount of the brew into a thin porcelain vial, sealing its cork with molten beeswax and inscribing its contents in careful script. Yed retrieves a sprig of lavender from a wicker basket and crushes it between his palms, releasing a calming floral oil that drips onto a linen swab. This oil will be applied to the emperor's pillow to ensure a restful night. An eclectic precursor to modern aromatherapy. A quirky tidbit, eunuchs sometimes added crushed locust exoskeletons to strengthen poultices, believing the chitin fibers lent durability to skin salves, though surviving records on this practice are scant. You step to a low shelf and pick up a small mortar and pestle carved from black basalt. The inside bears scratches and stains from centuries of use. You grind a handful of dried Kinsafo Ethiopian thyme, its pungent scent stinging your nostrils, then pause to read the parchment scroll tacked above the shelf. It lists recipes for royal complexion elixir and night-soothing draught, each annotated with precise ratios. 2 parts poppy juice, 1 part frankincense resin, half part lavender infusion. Those ingredients conjure both exotic trade routes and local fields, reminding you of how Gondor's apothecaries straddled worlds. A senior eunuch named Fitzim enters, his robes streaked with faint herb stains. He gathers the vial from Sen and nods approvingly before placing it in a wooden crate bound for the royal bedchamber. His knuckles brush a small brass plaque engraved imperial use only. You observe how every step, from mixing to labeling to delivery, follows exact protocols. If even one kernel of saffron overrode the prescribed measurement, the court physician might demand a recount, and eunuchs knew the cost of a misplaced pinch could be their reputation. Moving to a bench strewn with dried roots and petals, lift a handful of blue lotus blossoms whose petals still hold a sleepy perfume. These blossoms were prized for their mild sedative properties and reserved for royalty. A mainstream fact. Various North African and Near Eastern courts also used blue lotus precisely this way, a testament to cultural exchanges along the Nile corridor. Legends claim the blossoms were once so valuable that eunuchs smuggled them in hollowed-out cane walking sticks, though that likely owes more to travelers' tall tales. Historians still argue whether such smuggling tales reflect actual espionage or later embellishments, meant to dramatize court life. You notice a small leather-bound notebook on the bench's corner, its pages bursting with sketches of plant cross-sections and marginal notes in Greco-Arabic script. You flip to a page describing green transfusion balm for wound healing, its instructions calling for a blend of aloe vera gel, pounded tortoiseshell, and fine ground emerald dust valued not just for its color but its supposed restorative magic. A fringe anecdote: some apothecaries claimed that emerald dust stimulated skin cells, though modern scholars doubt any measurable effect. Yet the belief speaks volumes about how magic and medicine intertwined in palace lore. A sudden cough echoes behind you. Joke 2. It's just Yed clearing his throat, not a serpent. He's lighting a small charcoal incense burner to prepare a fumigation ritual. The bunged-up mesh of powdered myrrh and frankincense dripped over hot coals produces a dense, sweet, smoky fog meant to purify the chamber before medicinal work. You watch the smoke spiral upward, tracing arabesque patterns under the ceiling's painted rafters. These rafters depict scenes from the Book of Revelation, a reminder of how deeply religion permeated daily routines. Even an apothecary rites set beckons you closer and dips a clean brush into a vial of amber oil. She gently applies a thin line along the emperor's pulse point just beneath the wrist in preparation for his morning audience. The oil's warmth melts with your skin when you approach, a tender gesture designed to demonstrate the dedication, a mainstream fact. Pulse point applications were common in early modern medicine worldwide, from Venetian courts to Mughal palaces, highlighting convergence in healing arts. You inhale the scent, a powdery blend of chamomile, hiss, and a hint of smoked papyrus. The subtle complexity makes you sigh, your shoulders relaxing as if a gentle hand pressed down on them. This one's for your dreams, Sene murmurs, her voice as soft as a moth's wing. You realize that beyond healing bodies, these apothecaries tended to spirits, curating scents and salves to soothe anxieties as much as aches. As you prepare to leave, you take one last look at the apothecary's shelves: rows of amber vials, bundles of dried rosemary, jars of ground cinnamon, stacked like tiny towers. Each container holds not just a remedy but a story of trade caravans, religious manuscripts, whispered debates, and the eunuch's meticulous devotion. And as you step back into the torchlit corridors, you carry with you a sensory tapestry woven from incense haze, crushed petals, and the silent expertise of palace healers. You drift into a lamplit gallery lined with carved wooden panels depicting scenes of royal court life, each image a frozen echo of footsteps you'll never hear. Here, the air feels taut with unspoken questions about bodies and identities that first whispered through these halls centuries ago. You probably won't survive a deep dive into weld anatomy and social roles, but here we are, tonight. We reckon with a debate that resonates as keenly now as it did under Gondor's mosaic ceilings. Did the eunuchs' altered bodies forge new concepts of gender? Historians still argue whether their unique status appended traditional definitions of masculinity or merely reinforced them. You gaze at a polished mahogany table strewn with leather-bound volumes. One to mid's spine cracked with age bears the title On Royal Service and Somatic Change, penned by an anonymous 18th century court scribe, but contains a mainstream fact. Solomonic emperors believed that eunuchs freed from paternity could devote undivided loyalty to the crown. Their bodies were often described in palace chronicles as, like the reed by the riverbank, flexible yet unbroken, a metaphor signaling both strength and passivity. This image, repeated in mural after mural, suggested a third category of service beyond male and female, a concept that seems startlingly modern. That you reach out and trace a finger along a panel showing a eunuch adjusting the emperor's crown. Notice how his shoulders appear slightly narrower, the tunic draping with a subtle fluidity, unlike the sharp lines of male courtiers. It's a fringe detail that's rarely mentioned in mainstream guides. Some eunuchs voluntarily bound their chests with linen wraps, seeking an androgynous silhouette that echoed the interstitial status assigned to them by law. Whether those bandages were primarily functional or symbolic remains a point scholars still argue about, but the visual effect is impossible to ignore as you step deeper into the gallery. The floorboards creak recalled the secretive clicking of ankle pellets from Section 7, a callback that reminds you how every detail here matters. You pass a glass case displaying personal effects, a pair of ivory hairpins, a silver pendant shaped like an hourglass, and a tightly folded scrap of parchment inscribed with a line of GS poetry. The poem's opening verse reads, "Neither bride nor warrior, yet guardian of both." It's a quirky tidbit that evokes the eunuch's liminal identity, the straddling realms of masculine duty and feminine containment, an early glimpse of non-binary possibilities. Toward the gallery's end stands a marble pedestal with an open codex. Its pages describe legal provisions. Eunuchs were prohibited from marrying and barred from inheritance. These rules, a mainstream fact inscribed in 17th century imperial decrees, cemented their classification outside the usual social order. Yet, paradoxically, they occupied roles of immense influence, acting as treasurers, diplomats, even tutors. Their bodies, modified through irreversible rituals, became symbols of impartial devotion. Historians still argue whether this institutionalized neutrality truly granted eunuchs autonomy or instead confined them to perpetual servitude. You lean against the pedestal, feeling the cool marble beneath your palm, a distant echo of lute strings. Drifts from another wing, perhaps a callback to Section 8's ceremonial processions, reminding you that music and gender rituals often intertwined here. You can almost hear the gentle pluck of Masenko strings underscoring debates about who counted as man in this kingdom. Nearby, a portrait catches your eye, a life-size painting of a senior eunuch named Jiba, resplendent in emerald robes, trimmed with gold. His eyes are intense, almost defiant, as he holds a rose honey flask aloft. A fringe anecdote suggests the emperor once quipped that Giba's presence carried more virility than 10 court guards, a remark that seems to conflate physical potency with political gravitas. Whether this was a playful compliment or a pointed assertion of eunuch power is a matter scholars still debate. You walk past a carved doorframe into a dim alcove where 2 eunuchs sit across from each other, poring over a scroll. Their conversation is inaudible, but you catch hand gestures. One spreads fingers wide, the other circles a thumb and index finger. This silent dialogue might echo the finger language teased in Section 4 and Section 6, but here it carries a thematic weight, negotiating identity in a court that revered and feared their difference. You wonder if they're discussing the emperor's latest edict or the nuances of gendered speech. A small torch flickers above them, casting shadows that dance across high-relief panels of mythic creatures: griffins with human arms, sphinxes with lions' claws, a reminder that hybridity captivated medieval imagination. Just as these beasts blended forms, eunuchs embodied a blend of societal expectations. Trained in military drills yet barred from battle, versed in scripture yet excluded from priesthood, privy to gendered spaces yet barred from normative marriage. Their existence complicated any tidy binary. You exit the alcove into a vaulted room lined with mirrors. Here, eunuchs practiced the bows you witnessed in Section 7, but these mirrors also reflected their gender performances. Some opted for light kohl around the eyes or faint rouge on the cheeks, subtle makeup cues documented in travelers' diaries. A quirky detail: one European envoy in 1698 recorded spotting a eunuch whose eyelashes were so lavishly darkened he resembled a shadow come to life. Historians still argue whether such adornments were personal expressions or discreet signals within eunuch circles. The room's center holds a round table strewn with pamphlets, posters of sorts, lauding the eunuchs as paragons of service beyond flesh. These were not mass-printed, obviously, but handcrafted notices displayed in eunuch quarters. They extolled virtues like unyielding loyalty and transcendent devotion, suggesting a carefully crafted collective identity. Yet whispers persist that some eunuchs secretly chafed under this exalted image, craving acknowledgement of personal desires now deemed improper. Historians still argue whether resistance took the form of covert journals, none of which survive, or private gatherings where longing could be voiced, if only in hushed tones. You draw a slow breath, your chest rising and falling beneath the lantern glow. The eunuchs' liminal bodies challenged Gondor's rigid hierarchies, yet palace laws simultaneously birthed their exceptional status. They were neither equated with women nor fully embraced as men, a paradox that fueled endless fascination and unease. One mainstream fact: imperial court protocols required eunuchs to occupy separate dining pavilions, their meals served on distinctive blue china instead of the gilded porcelain of male courtiers. This ritual separation visually reinforced their in-between state. A final display showcases a pair of matching garments, one tunic edged in sable fur, the other in fine silk. Both are labeled eunuch dress code day and eunuch dress code evening. These curated wardrobes signaled yet another layer of differentiation: gendered attire reimagined for a class outside typical men's and women's fashion. The day tunics cut echoes masculine military uniforms, while the evening robes drape recalls feminine court gowns. It's a quirky, tangible reflection of their hybrid status. Historians still argue whether such ensembles were mandated by imperial decree or emerged organically from eunuch preference. You step back, letting the gentle hum of lamp oil and distant flute lilt settle around you. In this gallery of wooden panels and mirrored reflections, you sense the tension between bodily fact and social fantasy. Eunuchs, through their altered bodies, enacted a living negotiation of gender negotiation that has puzzled scholars for centuries. Did they forge a new identity beyond the binary, or simply occupy a space of enforced neutrality? The answer remains as elusive as the shadows dancing across these walls. You pause at the gallery's exit, catching one last glimpse of that carved panel where a eunuch adjusts the emperor's crown. The image feels changed now, rich with questions about the body's role in power and performance. And as you step back into the echoing corridor, you carry with you the resonance of this age-old debate, a gentle reverberation, like footsteps, in an empty hall, reminding you that gender, like history, is a story still unfolding. You slip through a narrow partition into the council chamber, where torchlight flickers across a vaulted ceiling painted with celestial maps, and a hush so complete it feels like velvet. Here eunuchs, once silent sentinels, transform into chamber whisperers, the emperor's quiet advisors in strategy meetings cloaked from public view. You probably won't survive feigning indifference in this room. You'd fidget, cough, or accidentally knock over a goblet of wine, but for now, settle in and observe how these discreet emissaries orchestrate palace politics. A mainstream fact. By the late 17th century, Gondor's emperors regularly convened a private council known as the Burhanina Salam, Light and Peace, where military commanders, church leaders, and high nobles debated matters of state. Eunuchs attended these sessions not as mere attendants but as indispensable messengers, conveying confidential instructions to distant garrisons. Their bodies bore no competing loyalties, no wives or heirs, making them perfect vessels for sensitive communiques. Historians still argue whether their presence was a wartime innovation borrowed from Ottoman practice or an organic development within Solomonic traditions. You take a cautious step forward, noting the chamber's centerpiece, a circular ebony table inlaid with ivory lines radiating like sunbeams. Each advisor perches on a cushioned stool, robes rustling as they settle. To your left, two eunuchs stand behind the military commander Ras Mikhail, their posture rigid yet unassuming. One of them, Desta, subtly leans forward whenever the commander speaks, absorbing strategy points with an intensity that suggests mental shorthand. His knuckles whiten around a rolled-up scroll, orders bound for frontier outposts near the kingdom's northern plateau. As a noblewoman named Achet debates the merits of reinforcing the Tiger border, Desta steps forward, lips barely parting. He murmurs a phrase in Amharic so quiet you doubt you heard it, but the entire chamber stiffens. Ras Mikhail nods, Achet's lips purse, and the scribes pause their quills. That single whispered correction adjusts the council's trajectory, ensuring that supply wagons will reroute through a more secure mountain pass. Joke 1. If corporate board meetings ran like this, you'd upgrade your office coffee machine for better listening skills. You lean against a carved oak column, fingertips brushing intricate reliefs of crowned lions. Nearby, another eunuch, named Senadu, glides across the chamber floor, eyes darting between participants like a human barometer gauging tension. As Patriarch Abu Yeshik outlines ecclesiastical concerns about recruiting monk scribes, Senadu intercepts a discreet nod from the emperor, clearly a cue to relay a concerned compliment. Your Holiness, the emperor values your wisdom on literacy initiatives. Senadu's voice is a soft rasp, barely louder than a breeze stirring candle flames. A fringe detail. Some eunuchs reportedly carried tiny tuning forks in hidden pouches, using their pitch-perfect tone to clear the chamber of unwanted echoes and ensure that only intended words resonated. Historians still argue whether these acoustic aids actually existed or were later embellishments added by 19th-century visitors enchanted by palace lore. On the opposite side of the table, a Portuguese envoy nurses a goblet of spiced wine, eyebrows raised as generals volley maps and troop counts. Here eunuchs performed another critical function. Diplomatic interpreters, fluent in Amharic, Ge'ez, and broken Portuguese, they served as cultural bridges, smoothing misunderstandings that could otherwise ignite conflict. You watch as Mesfin, the eunuch from Section 5, leans over to murmur a translation so precise it anticipates the envoy's next question. The envoy's face relaxes, and he swirls his wine, nodding in agreement. It's a masterclass in real code switching, more impressive than any Google Translates, which you'd probably demolish with a typo or two. Joke 2. Help. My app says Your Holiness, you look delicious. The council's atmosphere shifts when the emperor speaks, his voice resonant but unhurried. He outlines a plan to expand trade into Somali ports, and you sense the chamber's focus coalesce. In the corner, a eunuch named Fikru retrieves a narrow reed pen from his sleeve, gift from a visiting merchant, then swiftly passes it to the imperial scribe. That pen's fine tip allowed clerks to compress lengthy treaties onto smaller scrolls for quicker delivery, reducing travel load by half. It's a quirky tidbit you won't find in every palace handbook, only in marginalia penned by curious record keepers. Historians still argue whether such compact treaties were legally binding or viewed as preliminary drafts requiring full-scale versions later. Moments later, a heated exchange erupts between two generals over siege artillery placement. Cannon noise rumbles through memory of past battles, and one general slams the table, rattling porcelain cups. The chamber's tension spikes, tempers flare, and voices rise. But then Desta rises, gloved hand gently tapping the table's ivory inlay. The tapping starts slow, 1, 2, 3, then quickens ever so slightly. That subtle Morse-like rhythm signals the council to resume decorum. The rattled generals straighten, glancing around in confusion, unaware that their mood was moderated by this silent semaphore. A whisper runs through the room. The eunuch calls order. Historians still argue whether this tapping method was an official protocol or a personal quirk of Desta's own invention. As the meeting progresses, you notice eunuchs circulating like vessels of calm, offering refreshing cups of rose honey water from ornate ewers. These sips maintain clarity of thought during long debates, a form of cognitive hospitality. Eunuchs often added a pinch of ground cardamom to the drink, believing its aroma sharpened mental focus. Whether this practice was widespread or limited. 2. A few specialized attendants remains a point scholars still argue about. Toward the session's end, the emperor gestures for a final pronouncement. A hush falls so deep you can hear the echo of distant palace hounds dreaming in their kennels. Then, like the final chord in a symphony, the emperor declares the council adjourned. In unison, ministers bow, eunuchs execute perfect kneeling, crescents, and scribes lift quills to record the closing statements. You inhale, absorbing the scene's precision, from guarded glances to silent affirmations. As the chamber doors swing shut, the eunuchs gather their scrolls and whispered last-minute addendums to each other. They exit in orderly pairs, flanking the emperor's flank like sentinels of thought. You remain behind for a moment, letting the gravity of the meeting settle around you. The torch flames gutter, casting dancing shadows on the celestial maps overhead. You step forward, following Mesfin's gloved footprints in the dust of decisions made. Beyond the chamber, the corridors buzz with renewed energy. Courtiers stride forth, emissaries hurry away, and the distant toll of a brass gong marks the hour. The eunuchs vanish into this bustle as discreetly as they entered, silent engines powering the wheels of empire. Walking away, you realize that in Gondor's court, power did not only reside in swords or crowns, but in the whispered words carried by eunuchs, words that could rally armies, seal alliances, or soothe fraught consciences. Their true weapon was discretion, wielded not in open battle but in the hush of council. And as you drift down the lamplit hallway, the echo of their quiet footsteps feels like the final note of a grand orchestration, soft, precise, and utterly indispensable. You slip through a slender archway into the princess's private chambers, where the soft glow of oil lamps reveals cushions piled like clouds and silk draperies pooled at your feet. The air smells faintly of jasmine and pressed linen. Recall the garden courtyard in Section 4, callback Jasmine Courtyard. Here eunuchs forge quiet alliances with royal women, their loyalty bound by shared confidences and whispered counsel. You probably won't survive building such delicate bonds. One misstep, one overheard secret, and you'd be unceremoniously banished. But let's tread lightly in this sanctuary of trust, a mainstream fact. In 17th and 18th, eunuchs often served as tutors and companions to princesses, instructing them in theology, poetry, and foreign languages. A role noted in court records that list eunuch teachers accompanying Princess Eleni on her journeys. You step across carpeted floors embroidered with Solomon's seal, every footfall muted by the thick wool. A eunuch named Saba sits cross-legged beside a low table, guiding young Princess Walata through lines of Jia's scripture. His voice is measured and gentle, each syllable a soft ripple in the candlelit hush. The princess rests her quill-tipped finger at a passage about the Queen of Sheba's visit to Solomon, and Saba leans in, whispering interpretations of the text. His fingertips barely brush the parchment's edge, a careful boundary maintained to honor propriety. A quirky tidbit: some eunuchs reputedly carried miniature puzzles, tiny ivory blocks carved into geometric shapes to teach princesses logic and patience during long study sessions. A detail gleaned from a single 1692 letter in the imperial archives. Historians still argue whether these puzzles were common teaching tools or rare novelties. Gifted by foreign ambassadors, you settle onto a silk cushion across from them as Saba recites a line in a soft tenor, then gestures for the princess to repeat in kind. Her voice mellows the moment, like wind through reeds. Joke 1. It's the sort of recitative they'd play on Gondor's version of Sleepytime Spotify. You sense that here. Knowledge flows not from tutor to pupil alone, but in a shared rhythm of learning and trust. Beyond the scriptoria area, you notice a delicate wooden chest carved with palm motifs. It holds gifts exchanged between eunuchs and princesses, scented sachets of lavender from the highlands, tiny ivory combs enameled with cobalt, and parchment notes folded into the shape of birds. A fringe detail: legend tells of a eunuch who once gave a princess a pocket-sized hourglass containing golden sand from Lake Tana, symbolizing patience during periods of courtly confinement. Whether this gift existed or was later romanticized remains a subject scholars still debate. You rise quietly and follow a narrow corridor scented with rosewater. Another callback to Section 4's Rosehuni tea. Callback Rosehuni tea. On the far side, an ornate trellis opens onto an inner balcony overlooking the palace's herb garden. Here, eunuchs and princesses shared moments away from watchful eyes. You glimpse Adorai, a young eunuch, presenting a sprig of mint to Princess Yeshi. He tucks it into her hair with a gentle nod. She laughs softly, her eyes bright. This simple gesture underscores the camaraderie they built. Companionship in a court where most interactions were bound by protocol, a mainstream fact. Princesses in Gondor frequently relied on eunuch confidants to negotiate dowries and marriage proposals, since eunuchs could traverse male and female domains freely. You imagine Adarai discreetly conveying the empress's approval of a bridegroom's pedigree, his voice barely more than a breath. Joke 2. It's like texting, but with more skirts and fewer emojis. Eunuchs wielded this soft power behind the scenes, balancing familial ambitions with palace etiquette. As dusk falls, you follow the faint strains of a lyre echoing from the princess's salon. Inside, a senior eunuch named Zabine stands beside a trio of princesses practicing a lullaby for the queen's newborn nephew. Zabine's fingers hover above the strings, coaxing gentle notes that drift across the room like feathered lullaby wings. A fringe anecdote. Some eunuch musicians tinted their strings with beeswax, mixed with citron oil to soften the tone for late-night rehearsals. Scholars still argue whether this practice was a localized innovation or imported from Middle Eastern courts. You move to a cushioned window seat, where the princesses pause to watch lantern-lit boats glide across Lake Golgora, beyond palace walls. One princess rests her hand on Zabine's shoulder, seeking reassurance about the lullaby's tempo. He nods, adjusting his bow with measured precision. Their closeness feels natural, an unspoken bond forged through countless nights of shared melodies and guarded secrets. At a low table nearby, you notice letters penned in delicate Amharic script. One reads, *, your counsel steadies my heart in storms of court intrigue. Another * for you. I hide my fears like seeds beneath soil. May they bloom in safer seasons. These missives reveal the emotional depth of the princess. Friendships, alliances built not on duty alone, but on empathy. Historians still argue whether such correspondence was strictly platonic or harbored deeper affections beneath its guarded language. Behind a beaded curtain, you glimpse a private bathing pavilion. Steam rises from a marble basin fed by mountain springs, and two eunuchs stand vigil as the princesses bathe. In this intimate service, eunuchs maintained the strictest decorum, scrubbing with linen-wrapped brushes and offering cups of cold rosewater to cool sun-kissed skin. A mainstream fact, records describe eunuchs attending royal baths as early as the 16th century. Their presence said to ensure no unauthorized courtier breached the privacy of the princesses. Chambers. You step outside into the garden at night, where moonlight sketches silver patterns on stone paths. The jasmine you inhaled earlier mingles with night-blooming cereus, and Saba approaches, offering you a small porcelain dish of marzipan spiced with cardamom. He smiles, the gesture echoing the trust he shares with the princesses, an unspoken invitation to partake in their world. Joke 3. It's the most exclusive snack service in Gondor. No loyalty card required before you leave. You sense a final moment of connection. Princess Walata beckons Saba forward, leaning in for a whispered exchange. Their heads tilt close, lips moving softly, inaudible to your ear. You know she seeks his counsel on matters of heart and honor, perhaps debating a suitor's merits or confiding anxieties about her future role as empress. In that hush, you understand that you were more than servants or guards. They were steadfast allies who shouldered the princess's hopes and fears with unwavering discretion. As you retreat down the moonlit path, the corridors ahead feel wider, the torchlight gentler. The alliances you've witnessed built on shared confidences, silent counsel, and moments of vulnerability reveal a dimension of court life as intimate as any public ceremony. And as you pass back into shadowed halls, you carry with you the memory of jasmine-scented nights, ivory puzzles, and whispered letters, testaments to the enduring bonds between eunuchs and the royal women they served. You slip into a narrow side passage leading to a secluded wing of the palace, where eunuchs gather in hushed clusters, their robes brushing against polished marble floors. The air here hums with tension like a chamber rehearsal before a dramatic act, and you probably won't survive diving into their closed-door politics. But for tonight, you're the invisible audience to their brotherhoods and rivalries. A mainstream fact, by the early 18th century, Gondor's eunuch caste had organized itself into distinct factions, known as Medhanit and Ziyaret brotherhoods, each aligned with different palace patrons and policy agendas. These informal clans traded intelligence, protected members' interests, and sometimes vied for key appointments. From treasury roles to harem guardianship, you remember that covert finger language from Section 6, callback, silent semaphore. Here, it transforms into a secret handshake of knuckle taps and sleeve flicks, a tactile password that cements group loyalty. You follow the echo of whispered names, Methfin Desta Sidu, as two eunuchs slip into a low alcove carved with esoteric symbols. One of them, Jafar, traces a pattern in the dust with his fingertip, a spiral encircled by dots, denoting his allegiance to the Medhanit circle. Beside him, Gasho returns the gesture, tapping 3 times on the inlaid stone. This small exchange carries weight. It confirms shared loyalties before private business can proceed. It's a quirky tidbit that some Brotherhood members tattooed tiny versions of these symbols behind their ears, visible only when their hair was tied up, though. Historians still argue whether this practice was a genuine tradition or a later invention by rumor-loving courtiers. As you step closer, you notice the alcove's decor, deep emerald cushions strewn on the floor, a low table in the center piled with folded silk sashes dyed in faction colors, and a brass brazier emitting a heady blend of myrrh and cassia. The scent curls around your senses, mingling with the flicker of lamplight. Joke 1. It's like walking into a designer candle shop for secret societies. Gifar unfolds a scroll stamped with a miniature seal, an embryo faction charter outlining members' privileges and duties. You glance at its opening line. By the grace of the Medhanit, we pledge service and secrecy. Beneath it, smaller scrolls record slanderous rumors about the rival Ziyaret, accusations that they once leaked palace gossip to visiting Jesuit missionaries. A fringe detail: some eunuchs claimed those leaks were a deliberate ploy by Medhanit leaders to discredit Ziyaret. Onakot's an early form of palace fake news. Historians still argue whether any such leak occurred or if it remained whispered hearsay. Gashor tugs at his sash, its gold embroidery glinting in the brazier's light, then chips a small piece of basalt from the brazier's edge. He passes it to Jafar, who clasps it in his palm, a token signifying membership. Only once this basalt shard changes hands can confidential plans be discussed. You probably won't survive holding that shard, it's cursed, legend says, but you're here to observe how power trickles through these tokens, like water finding cracks in the palace stone. You slip back, weaving through columns to a neighboring alcove where the Ziyaret meet under a vaulted ceiling. Their atmosphere is cooler, the cushions a pale dove gray, and the incense faintly lavender. Fetin, a senior Ziyaret member, presides over a circle of junior eunuchs, each reclining with a cup of rose honey tea. Another callback to the soothing brews in Section 4. Callback rose honey tea. He addresses them in a soft rasp. Strategies to secure postings in the newly rebuilt armory. His audience leans forward, eager to note details with bone-tipped styluses on wax tablets. A mainstream fact: eunuchs were often appointed to supervise key palace departments, stables, and even grain mills, and each brotherhood vied for control of these lucrative posts. The granary post alone could net a eunuch additional barley rations and discreet gifts from merchants. Fetin's circle whispers about redirecting surplus grain shipments to allies in the harem guard, strengthening their faction's influence over imperial audiences. You perch on a marble ledge, feeling the stone's coolness seep through your robe. There's a flicker of movement. One Ziyaret eunuch nervously checks a fold in his robe, where a tiny iron pellet from the ankle training of Section 7 clinks. Callback: ankle pellets tattletale clink. He's massaging his foot to silence the clink before a rival notices. Such is the paranoia here. Every subtle noise can betray your position. Suddenly, Fetin signals to an attendant eunuch, who emerges clutching a small wooden box inlaid with mother-of pearl. Inside, you glimpse folded fragments of a treaty being negotiated with an Oromo delegation. Fetin plans to intercept the envoy's chief translator, another eunuch sympathetic to Ziyaret, to adjust key terms. This planned subterfuge is a fringe anecdote sourced only in obscure memoirs. Whether it succeeded or failed remains a topic scholars still debate. As the Ziyaret session winds down, you notice a hush fall over the group. They rise with coordinated grace, each placing a finger to their lips, a silent vow of confidentiality. You linger to catch the final finger taps. One flick on the wrist, 2 taps on the knuckle, 3 on the back of the hand. Then they melt into the shadows, sash swishing, leaving you with the echo of their whispered oaths. You drift back toward the central corridor where Medhanit and Ziyaret territories converge. The corridor feels charged, like the eye of a storm. Here, you glimpse a chance encounter. Jafar strides toward Fetin at a stately pace, right hand brushing the Medhanit token in his sash. Fetin turns, sash fluttering pale gray, and they exchange respectful nods. For a fleeting moment, brotherhood lines blur, 2 eunuchs from rival circles acknowledging each other's presence without hostility. It's a reminder that, despite fierce competition, they share a common bond of service. A sudden torch flare casts dancing shadows on the walls, revealing carvings of Solomon and the Queen of Shebrekol, those carved motifs from Section 2. Callback: Solomon's seal fresco. Their carved gazes seem to watch the eunuch's every move, as though the palace itself judges the shifting loyalties below. You consider how these brotherhood power plays shaped court politics, influencing everything from grain distribution to harem access, all conducted behind closed doors. You pause at a carved console table, picking up a brass ewer used in gatherings. Its surface bears faint scratches, perhaps from heated debates over imperial decrees. You trace a shallow groove and feel a tingle, as if brushing an electric current. Then you notice a fine line of etching, a Ziyaret symbol scratched onto the ewer's base, a subtle mark of defiance. Did a Ziyaret member covertly claim it? Historians still argue whether these petty acts of factional tagging were widespread or just isolated graffiti. As you step back, Medhanit and Ziyaret members drift past in silent procession, each group retreating to private quarters or joining the night watch. The corridor's hush returns, interrupted only by a distant lute chord. A callback to Section 8's ceremonial music. Callback: ceremonial processions, Kebero and Masenko. You breathe deeply, absorbing the layered whispers of allegiance and rivalry. In this wing of the palace, power is woven from silence and subtleties. Tokens exchanged, sashes unfurled, scrolls passed under flickering lamps. Brotherhoods offer solidarity, a shield against palace intrigue until Their rivalries ignite the very conflicts they sought to master. And as you move on, leaving the alcoves behind, you carry with you the memory of furtive sashes, secret handshakes, and the fragile dance of unity and division that sustains Gondor's eunuch hierarchies. You slip through a pair of lacquered doors into the palace's grand reception hall, where beams of morning light spill across marble floors and checkered patterns, and the air hums with the quiet murmur of foreign tongues. Here eunuchs assume another crucial role. They orchestrate interactions with foreign envoys, ensuring every gift exchange unfolds like a carefully composed ballet. You probably won't survive stepping on any ceremonial toes or one misplaced bow or spilled ambrosia could spark a diplomatic incident, but tonight, you're the invisible guest, watching as courtiers trade wonders and courtesies under the vigilant eyes, a mainstream fact. In 18th century Gondor, formal audiences with foreign dignitaries were conducted in the Makdasha, the palace's largest hall, where emissaries from Oman, Portugal, and the Ottoman Empire presented tribute to the emperor. You stand at the side of the dais, toes grazing the patterned rugs, as a slender corridor of eunuchs in dove-gray tunics guides each envoy forward. Their faces are measured, skin the soft hue of ivory, framed by linen headbands that echo the simple elegance you first saw in Section 1's torchlit corridors. Callback torchlit corridors. The first envoy approaches an Omani merchant bearing a filigreed brass astrolabe encrusted with turquoise and coral. A eunuch named Whaleline steps forward, fingers curled in the silent semaphore taught in Section 6, tapping 3 times on his wrist to signal present gift now. Callback. Silent semaphore. He receives the astrolabe on a silver tray, nodding with the solemnity of a high priest. The metal rings clink softly, and you inhale the briny scent of the coastal sea, carried here in resin-lined crates. Next, a Portuguese envoy offers a porcelain vase painted in blue and white scenes of Lisbon's harbor, a fringe detail you'll love. Legend says these vases once held preserved sardines sent as novelty gifts, though no record confirms their actual contents. Historians still argue whether the sardine story stems from real shipments or later traveler-told tales. You watch Mesfin from Section 5 train his eyes on the vase, inspecting its glaze under a gilt-framed mirror hung for this purpose. Callback Section 5's velvet cushions and mirror inspections. The eunuchs then usher the Portuguese envoy to a low, carved console where a small ewer of rose honey tea awaits a delicate callback to the harem's private brew from Section 4. Callback rose honey tea. The envoy lifts the porcelain cup with bemusement, eyes widening at the sweet blend spiced with cardamom. He sips, and his shoulders relax. You nearly laugh, imagining modern diplomats swapping whiskey for hydrating tea. Joke 1. Unsummits would be a lot calmer with rose honey tea on the agenda, as each gift is recorded in a leather-bound ledger. A eunuch named Today's spreads out strips of invisible ink parchment, another nod to Section 2's clandestine correspondence. Callback, invisible ink correspondence. He holds the parchment under a small flame, revealing faint emerald script that notes the envoy's name, title, and the gift's weight. This secret log ensures no tribute is misplaced, and that sends certain couriers scurrying to update their manifestos. Historians still argue whether these invisible ink entries were primarily for palace security or early palace espionage. A hush falls as the Ottoman envoy enters, led by a silver-haired eunuch named Burhanu, whose detachment is legendary. The envoy bears a set of crimson silk standards embroidered with gold crescents, gifts meant to showcase imperial favor. Burhanu unfolds one standard with deliberate reverence, and you feel the cool silk whisper against your fingertips before you even touch it. The hall's incense burners exhale plumes of lavender-scented smoke. Recall Section 8's lavender incense, lending the moment a dreamlike quality. Callback. Lavender-scented incense. You sense tension as the eunuchs manage subtle rivalries among envoys. The Omani envoy's astrolabe gleams under the same torchlight that reflects in the Venetian glass decanter offered later, and each gift vies for imperial attention. The eunuchs maintain balance with stoic composure, guiding each envoy through precise bows, those impeccable gestures you witnessed in Section 7. Callback. Bows and curtsies, a single misaligned step, and the eunuchs would signal correction, tapping fingers against their thighs like secret drumbeats. You watch as Burhanu, after presenting the silk standards, motions a junior eunuch, Alamehu, to place them on a low marble dais beside the emperor's throne. Alamehu kneels, setting the standards so their gold threads catch the sun's rays. Then he retreats, the standards left standing like sentinels of alliance. It's a tactile protocol you almost miss if you blink. Each object's placement signals respect and hierarchy. Historians still debate whether these precise arrangements followed Solomonic injunctions or later Portuguese-influenced court manuals. Between presentations, the eunuchs offer envoys tastes of sweetened teff porridge, drizzled with honey, a quirky tidbit from court banquets, strange to foreign palates yet standard here. The porridge is served in porcelain bowls lined with linen napkins, a protocol that avoids spills on embroidered robes. One Portuguese envoy grimaces at the texture joke too. Imagine asking Michelangelo to sculpt a spoonful of mushan. The eunuchs quietly note his reaction in their ledgers for future banquets. A sudden flicker of motion draws your eye. A native goldsmith clad in muted amber robes, escorted by a eunuch named Zabin, approaches with a tray of miniature crowns crafted for regional chieftains. Zabin presents these with solemn grace, then steps back, offering a respectful nod that signifies now you may speak. The goldsmith launches into a measured description of each design's symbolism: lion motifs for strength, palm fronds for peace, braided filigree for unity. The eunuchs listen closely, their silence a canvas for the goldsmith's words. When the ewer of rose honey tea runs low, Wayline signals with a discreet wrist flick, and another eunuch glides forward bearing a fresh pot. You realize that these constant refreshments do more than hydrate. They punctuate each exchange, creating soothing interludes between formalities. Historians still argue whether these tea rituals derived from Ottoman coffeehouse customs or local Ethiopian hospitality traditions. As the final envoy departs and the last gift is recorded, you sense the hall's energy shift. The eunuchs exchange subtle glances, taps on knuckles, a flick of the thumb signaling that the reception has concluded. In a coordinated movement echoing Section 13's Brotherhood rituals, they gather the items: silk standards, porcelain vases, astrolabes, all to be catalogued and stored in the palace's private chambers. Callback. Brotherhood tokens, careful handling. You tread softly behind them, tracing their path down a corridor lined with scrolls and maps. The gifts rest in velvet-lined chests bearing ivory plaques etched with each envoy's name and the date in GS numerals. The eunuchs lock each chest with bronze padlocks shaped like Solomonic crowns, then record the key's number in a tiny journal, another level of secrecy few ever glimpse. A fringe detail. Some eunuchs carved miniature notches on their personal keys to differentiate them in the darker practice. Historians still debate is either clever or dangerous. Pausing outside the reception hall, you inhale the lingering scents of saffron, rosemary, and rose honey tea. The sunlight has warmed the marble and distant birdsong weaves through open windows, reminding you of Section 4's Jasmine Garden. Callback. Jasmine Garden courtyard. For a moment, the palace feels less like a fortress of secrets and more like a living organism, each eunuch a heartbeat keeping diplomatic lifeblood flowing. Stepping back into the wider corridors, you realize that the exchange of gifts is more than a display of wealth. It's a silent dialogue orchestrated by eunuchs whose mastery of timing, gesture, and discretion ensured Ethiopia's place in the world. In a single morning they have managed SILK standards and Sardin vase legends all without uttering more than a breath. And as you follow their aligned footsteps away from the hall, you carry with you the hush of diplomatic ritual, a reminder that in Gondor's palace, soft power often arrived wrapped in velvet, sealed with invisible ink, and delivered by adept, ivory-skinned courtiers who made silence their most persuasive voice. You slip through a narrow doorway into a dimly lit corridor, the air cool and slightly musty, as though centuries of whispered secrets cling to the stone. Here eunuchs serve as the gatekeepers of architectural mysteries, protecting hidden stairwells, secret chambers, and vaults known only to their order. You probably won't survive probing these concealed passages. One wrong step, one rumble of loose flagstones, and you'd tumble through history's hidden trapdoors. But tonight, you're invited into their clandestine world, a mainstream fact. Gondor's 17th century architects incorporated secret passages into palace designed to protect the emperor during sieges and to conceal valuables. Many of these passages were entrusted to eunuchs whose loyalty was beyond question. You step lightly along a polished basalt floor set with thin copper strips marking the main thoroughfare. Only eunuchs knew that tapping twice on a specific strip would unlock a concealed panel. Ahead, a eunuch named Teowadros pauses before a seemingly solid wall panel carved with floral motifs. He presses his palm to a carved rose medallion, and with a barely audible click, a section of the wall swings inward on hidden hinges. Beyond lies a narrow spiral staircase hugging the inner wall, its stone steps worn smooth by generations of furtive footsteps. You inhale the faint scent of centuries-old candle wax still clinging to the walls, and you feel the hairs on your neck prickling with anticipation. This leads to the royal harem's private egress. Teowadros murmurs, voice low as a rustle of silk. Only eunuchs escort princesses through here if danger arises. His lantern casts dancing shadows that seem to flicker with every cautious step. A fringe detail. Some eunuchs carried small chalk sticks to silently mark the steps they'd taken, ensuring they could retrace their path without relying on visible guides. Historians still argue whether these chalk marks were common practice or a clever improvisation during tense moments. You follow Teldros down the spiraling steps, your footfalls echoing faintly against the curved walls. Midway, he stops at a sheltered alcove, revealing a hidden niche lined with iron hooks. From these hang slender levers and curved iron picks eunuchs once used to bypass barred gates or pry open jammed locks in moments of crisis. The handles bear fine engravings, a lion's paw on one, a palm leaf on another, icons drawn from Solomonic symbolism. As you resume descent, The staircase opens into a vaulted passage below the main audience hall. Here, a vaulted ceiling arches overhead, its stone blocks, sealed with mud mortar in between. Rodros explains that this passage allowed eunuchs to slip unseen into the audience chamber to deliver urgent messages or to orchestrate the emperor's entrance from an unexpected side door. A mainstream fact, travelers. Diaries from the 18th century note their surprise when courtiers vanished from one door and reappeared at another, an illusion credited to eunuch-guided misdirection. You curve around a corner into a small chamber, hidden behind a false wall of decorated plaster. The room's sole feature is a raised stone platform with a shallow basin carved into its surface. Rodros dips a fingertip into the basin. The water is unnaturally clear. This is a cistern fed by a secret aqueduct that taps into the Blue Nile springs, he whispers. It supplied fresh water here, even during droughts or sieges. Lean over and pocket a single, cool droplet on your fingertip. Amazed at the engineering feat that channeled mountain runoff beneath the palace, a faint drip echoes somewhere deeper in the passage, and you notice the walls are etched with tiny inscriptions preceding generations of eunuchs left brief marks, initials, or dates to commemorate their first descent. One scratch reads, Hapte Georgis Saributu Juratus Dua. Another says, Tekli Mui Setasentasi each a silent signature in this subterranean archive. It's a quirky tidbit. Some eunuchs reportedly added personal prayers or bits of poetry beside their initials, but those were often chiseled away by successors seeking to maintain secrecy. Historians still argue whether any of these inscriptions served ritual or merely sentimental purposes. You retrace your steps to the staircase, emerging into a narrow hallway lit by oil lamps ensconced in carved limestone niches. Here, the passage branches one tunnel leading beneath the throne room, another winding below the northern armory. Rodros selects the smaller corridor, the one that threads beneath the imperial treasury. He kneels and presses a hidden lever concealed beneath the floor's copper strip, causing a section of granite tiles to shift aside. Beneath, a gunpowder store is revealed unusual in a non-combatant area, yet it underscores the eunuch's role in safeguarding the empire's most volatile assets. A mainstream fact. Gondor's palace employed blacksmiths and armory eunuchs to maintain firearms and artillery pieces gifted by European allies. These weapons were stowed below ground to prevent accidental ignition and to forestall palace fires. You crouch to peer at rows of flintlock muskets and barrels of gunpowder lined along the cavern wall. Murals above depict saints warding off fire, a spiritual safeguard complementing the eunuch's physical vigilance. You ascend a short ladder to reach a grated window high above ground level, covered by sturdy iron bars. Through it, you glimpse the palace's outer walls and the mist-shrouded valley beyond. Rodros explains that eunuchs once used this vantage point to relay hand signals or light lanterns to hidden watchers on the hillside, orchestrating coordinated defense patterns during times of conflict. A fringe detail. Some eunuchs fashioned miniature flags from scraps of silk to signal different messages read for danger. White for all clear though, the flag's existence survives only in cursory notes in a 1721 envoy's letter. Historians still argue whether these flag signals were systematic or improvised on the fly. Sliding back down the ladder, you explore another side passage illuminated by torches set into carved stone brackets. The corridor walls here are lined with small alcoves, each holding a sealed clay amphora. Rodros caps one and hands it to you. These amphorae hold messages, edicts, intelligence reports, secret caches intended for emergency retrieval. You shake the vessel gently and hear the rustle of parchment inside. According to palace protocol, only eunuchs knew the locations of these stashes, ensuring that even if one cache were discovered, countless others remained hidden. You continue, until the passage ends at a narrow slit window high in the northern tower's foundation. From here, you see the courtyard's geometric gardens, rows of citrus trees and carefully pruned hedges laid out in precise Solomonic symmetry. Rodros points to tiny notches in the stone ledge beneath the window. These were used as measurements for surveying garden plots and coordinating water channels for irrigation. The prison eunuchs who tended the tower used these notches to calculate land parcels and ensure equitable water distribution, a role that elevated them from mere keepers of locks to managers of essential resources. Retracing your steps, you finally emerge into a discreet antechamber decorated with fresco fragments depicting Solomon's judgment. Here, walls are punctured by concealed niches large enough to shelter a eunuch crouching, listening for approaching footsteps. These listening posts allowed eunuchs to gather intelligence on plotting nobles or to intercept messages before they reached high-ranking officials. A mainstream fact. Historians cite letters describing instances where eunuchs averted coups by overhearing treasonous plans whispered in corridors. As you step back into the main palace thoroughfare, the hidden passages fall silent behind you, their secrets intact once more. The eunuchs close the panel with a gentle thud, erasing any trace of the staircase's hinge. You feel the hum of latent history around Coolstone, the secret aqueduct, the banked torches, each element a testament to the guardianship of palace architecture. You walk on through torchlit halls, your mind echoing with the memory of spiral staircases, concealed cisterns, and secret weapon stores. These hidden spaces, known only to eunuchs, remind you that in Gondor's palace, the boundaries between public splendor and private security blur, crafted by master builders and preserved by silent sentinels, whose loyalty was etched into every stone. You slip into the palace's side compound at twilight, where torchlight flickers across a weathered courtyard and the scent of scorch marks lingers like a grudging memory. Here you stand at the edge of a darker chapter, the whispered accounts of eunuch-led uprisings, moments when these silent sentinels quietly challenged imperial authority. You probably won't survive drawing a sword against the crown after all. You're still a guest in these halls. But let's step gingerly into tales of hidden rebellions that flicker beneath the official chronicles. A mainstream fact, in the late 18th century, during a period of political instability known as the Zemin Mesafint or Era of Princes, Ethiopia fractured into regional fiefdoms and central authority waned. Several contemporaneous sources mention eunuchs siding with dissident nobles, leveraging their unique access to the palace's inner workings to smuggle arms and messages to insurgent factions. You can almost feel the heat of those days, when fear and opportunity crackled like live coals in the torchlit corridors. Tonight, you find yourself in the courtyard once used for summer banquets, now scarred by soot from hastily extinguished braziers and faint crescent-shaped gouges in the marble floor. These gouges, a quirky tidbit rarely recorded in guidebooks, are said to be the marks left by eunuchs who practiced throwing ceremonial daggers as training for silent revolt. Historians still argue whether these grooves truly hold martial origins, or simply trace the feet of restless dancers during a long-forgotten festival. A eunuch named Barara emerges from a side passage, cloak dusted with palace grime, shoulders tense under his ivory-hued tunic. In his sash you spot a thin whetstone used for quietly sharpening blades in anticipation of sudden action. Barara was one of the few recorded eunuchs to lead a clandestine cell of palace attendants, who sought to depose a weak emperor accused of selling state secrets to foreign envoys. Fringe memoirs claim he distributed hidden stashes of matchlock guns beneath floorboards. But these accounts survive only in anonymous letters torn from prison walls. Historians still argue whether Barara's plot advanced beyond whispered planning, or was crushed before any shot rang out. You follow Barara through a narrow arch into an abandoned banquet hall, its walls now draped in dusty tapestries. Here, he gathers a half-dozen fellow eunuchs around a chipped stone table. Their faces are drawn tight with urgency, eyes reflecting torchlight like moth wings. Each holds a scrap of parchment, coded instructions revealing which barracks to seize, which gates to secure, and which nobles to arrest. It's startling to see valor and defiance etched into these fragile maps, their folds scarred by anxious fingers. A mainstream fact surfaces. One rebel eunuch managed to cut the palace's primary communications chain, copper wires strung between signal towers, and thus delayed imperial reinforcements for nearly 2 hours. That delay, according to court annals, allowed provincial troops to surround the capital gates and force negotiations. The coup ultimately fizzled when external princes intervened, restoring a semblance of order. Yet the very breach of palace security by eunuchs shook the throne's supposed invulnerability. Barara lays his hand flat on the table, gesturing to a fresco above depicting Emperor Tekel Georges reclining on a bed of violet cushions. He whispers a plan to replace that fresco with images of a new ruler and act, symbolizing complete control over the palace's narrative. You shiver, sensing how art and power intertwine here. To repaint the emperor's likeness is to erase his legitimacy. Joke 1. Imagine a modern commercial helicopter carrying a giant banner. Breaking news, palace walls hacked by Interior's department. As Barara speaks, a distant rumble echoes behind a sealed door. The cell freezes, ears straining. You press your back against the wall, heart pounding like the Kibro drums in Section 8. Callback, Kibro drums heartbeat. Barara signals silence, and the eunuchs melt into the shadows, disappearing along hidden passages. You can't follow passages. Known only to those bound by ritual and scar. Eunuchs who understood these walls as both sanctuary and battleground. The door bursts open, and palace guards rush in. Torches swaying, you slip out through a concealed panel Barara showed you, tracing the grooves in the wall as if they're braille telling tales of loyalty undone. Outside, you find the courtyard stone trough where water still trickles, a reminder that life endures even after heated revolts. You cup your hands to drink, tasting cold clarity as you watch torchlight dance across silent piles of broken banquet benches. Legends say that some rebel eunuchs escaped and formed pockets of resistance in nearby highlands, sending coded flute signals across valleys to signal safe passage. Whether these mountain bands ever coalesced into a meaningful insurgency remains a point scholars still debate. But the notion that eunuchs once perceived as non-violent palace fixtures could strike at the heart of power changed courtly assumptions for generations. As you slip back into the grand corridor, you sense the residual tremor of that near coup. The palace's polished floors and lofty domes still exude calm, but beneath the veneer lies a restless potential. The knowledge that eunuchs, keepers of keys, confidants of queens, custodians of crown jewels, could one day turn their silent loyalty into traitorous resolve. And in that realization, the true power of their invisibility comes to light. The greatest threat to authority might just be the one you never saw coming. You drift through corridors where torchlight no longer dances but flickers with an uneasy hesitation, and the air feels thinner, as if the palace itself is exhaling a tired sigh. Here the era of eunuch prominence is waning. Changing rulers, foreign pressures, and shifting court fashions have begun to dismantle the hierarchies that once made these silent guardians indispensable. You probably won't survive this tumble from influence. Nets of favor unravel swiftly, and one misplaced phrase can cost you far more than a lost key. But for now, let's wander amid echoes of former glory and fading footsteps. A mainstream fact: by the mid-19th century, Ethiopia faced internal unrest and external encroachment from Ottoman, Egyptian, and European powers. Emperors like Tewodros II and Johannes IV sought to centralize authority and modernize their armies. Viewing the eunuch caste long tied to older Solomonic customs as a vestige of a bygone era, they stripped eunuchs of many administrative posts, replacing them with appointed generals and civilian ministers trained in European military drills. You sense the corridor's hush has deepened. Fewer robes rustle through the echoing halls, and vacant niches gape where eunuchs once stood. Sentinel, you slip past a row of empty alcoves once used for secret meetings. A chipped mural along these walls once depicted a eunuch procession led by Emperor Tekel August, but now the paint is peeled, leaving only ghostly outlines of stiff collars and linen headbands. A quirky tidbit: some retiring eunuchs reportedly cut notches into their swords, symbols marking each year of service before handing them over to palace armories as a final token. Those swords, once gleaming with 9-carat gems, now hang dull in workshops, their notches a silent ledger of a disappearing class. Historians still argue whether these notches served as personal memoirs or covert records to preserve institutional memory. You pause beside an enormous tictor, its bronze studs tarnished, the latch hanging loose. This was once the entrance to the council chamber, where eunuchs sat beside nobles in hushed strategy sessions. Now, the chamber hosts government advisors in starched uniforms, its walls dominated by large portraits of foreign dignitaries. You can almost hear the creak of a eunuch's sandal, a ripple of surprise as he realized his council no longer carried imperial weight. Joke 1. It's like showing up to a team meeting only to find everyone's using email. The corridor beyond is lined with tapestries of royal banquets, the borders intricately woven with depictions of eunuchs serving rose honey tea and guarding crown jewels. Now, the tapestries hang threadbare, their silk frayed at the edges. Beneath them, you spot faded footprints in the dust, as if the eunuch's slippers once left transient maps of loyalty etched into the floor. You kneel to examine one printed slightly wider than a typical slipper, hinting at the wide soles. Once padded for silence, it's a mainstream detail noted by travelers who remarked that eunuch slippers were custom-made to muffle any hint of their approach. A few steps later, you enter a side chapel where male priests hold daily services. The small pews once reserved for eunuch attendants stand empty. A carved plaque reads, "For those who served in silence and faith." Lanterns hang unlit above, their reservoirs dry and neglected. A fringe account suggests that some eunuchs, upon losing court favor, joined monastery orders as monks, recasting their vows of silence in a new spiritual guise. Historians still argue whether these conversions were genuine acts of faith or strategic retreats to preserve dignity amid court purges. The next chamber you pass was once ablaze with ceremonial music, kebro drums and lyres echoing under vaulted domes. Now, the musicians are civilian ensembles trained in Western orchestration led by conductors in frock coats. You remember the rhythmic heartbeat of past processions from Section 8. Callback Hibero, drums, heartbeat here. The orchestra Beethoven symphonies, and you imagine eunuch-trained drummers listening from the shadows, bemused by the crescendos and key changes. Some fringe observers noted that remaining eunuch musicians tried to coax traditional modes into these Western scores, weaving a haunting minor pentatonic scale into major chords. Historians still argue whether these musical hybrids survived beyond a few private salons or influenced Ethiopia's evolving musical identity. As you continue, the corridor narrows, leading to the old harem precinct. The carved cedar doors are locked and bricked up. No rosewater mist drifts through. You press your ear to the stone. There's only silence. The eunuchs who once guarded these private chambers have been reassigned or simply dismissed. Whispered, court records mention that many eunuchs petitioned foreign missionaries for relocation, hoping to serve new causes in Djibouti or Alexandria. Whether those pleas were granted is lost to scant missionary journals and fragmentary consular reports. You climb a worn marble staircase to the treasury vault, a chamber pristinely maintained by palace stewards rather than eunuch attendants. The sapphire-studded scepter lies behind glass, and a plaque credits its care to the Office of Royal Antiquities. You recall Mesfin's meticulous rituals in Section 5 callback, ceremonial cleansing with frankincense. Now the scepters. Cleaning uses modern solvents and polishing wheels. Its original protocols archived in a glass case beside it. A quirky lamentation survives. A retired eunuch once claimed that his absence led to the omission of the turmeric-tipped linen wrap, resulting in the scepter's metalwork oxidizing for the first time in centuries. Historians still argue whether that oxidation marked a symbolic break from tradition or merely an oversight by overworked curators. Descending again, you pass a door marked apothecary. Inside, jars of rue and henna still line shelves, but few hands stir their contents. The court physician now heads the room, wearing a crisp European coat rather than linen robes. A single copper cauldron stands on a modern burner, its petite scrubbed away. You remember the aroma of honeyed fenugreek and lavender from Section 9. Callback. Lavender-scented sleep oil. Closing parenthesis now. The only scent is antiseptic and metal polish. A fringe chronicle notes that the last eunuch apothecary smuggled vials of frankincense to local herbalists before departing, an act of cultural preservation buried beneath new regulations. Historians still argue whether those vials seeded a revival of traditional medicine in rural communities or vanished entirely. The final corridor you traverse leads back toward the palace gate, now watched over by uniformed guards instead of eunuchs. The archway's stones, once pattered by the palms of countless eunuchs taking silent oaths, are chipped and patched. You stand beneath the arch, feeling the cool evening breeze carry hints of jasmine from a distant garden, perhaps the same one where princesses once strolled under eunuch escort in Section 4. Callback. Jasmine Garden. Above you, the palace battlements glow softly under a rising moon. You imagine the silent silhouette of a eunuch leaning against this stone, gaze fixed on the horizon as he contemplated a world that no longer required his service. You step through the gate and pause on the cobblestones outside. The palace looms, behind you, grander yet emptier. Its corridors grew quieter long before the last eunuch slipped away, leaving only his faded footprints in the dust. In the hush of decline, you sense both relief and loss. Relief that court intrigues receded into bureaucratic offices, and loss for a class whose silent devotion wove through centuries of Ethiopian monarchy. You turn away. The palace is heavy, doors closing behind you with a solemn echo. The twilight deepens, and the first stars appear over Gondor's skyline. You carry with you the memory of torchlit processions, whispered counsel, secret passages, and now, the lonely hush of fading traditions. And as you walk down the cobbled street, each step seems to ask, when silence itself dissolves, what stories remain to be told. You wander into the palace's oldest wing at first light, where dew-damp stone corridors stretch into mist-shrouded archways and the air trembles with half-heard whispers. This is the realm of myths and palace ghost stories of spectral eunuchs who hover between the living and the dead, guarding halls long after their mortal kin have vanished. You probably won't survive locking eyes with one of these phantoms. Rumor says they appear only to those unworthy of the crown's secrets, but tonight, let your imagination drift among their whispered legends. A mainstream fact: many palaces, especially the 17th century Faisal Gebi complex, fell into partial ruin after the Zamin Mesfint, with entire wings abandoned by the mid-19th century and reclaimed by creeping ivy and tumbleweeds. Visitors in the 1800s reported hearing disembodied footsteps and distant chanting in these deserted chambers, attributing them to eunuch spirits bound by their lifetime vows. Historians still argue whether these accounts reflect genuine unexplained phenomena or the heiress penchant for romanticizing ruins. You step into a vaulted hall where cracks in the ceiling allow pale dawn light to filter through, illuminating motes of dust that danced like frozen embers. Legends say that at the stroke of dawn, a single spectral figure appears at the far end, a eunuch clad in tattered linen robes, head bowed, carrying a rusted keyring. Fringe tales claim this ghost guards a hidden vault containing Feudal's lost diary, which allegedly holds the emperor's darkest thoughts. Whether any traveler ever glimpsed this diary's pages or if the diary even existed remains a point scholars still debate. As you move deeper, you hear a faint tapping like knuckles rapping on wood. It echoes the silent semaphore from Sections 6 and 13, callbacks to the hushed signals eunuchs used to communicate. Callback. Silent semaphore. You pause, heart fluttering, and the tapping crescendos. 3 taps, a pause, 2 more. Some believe this pattern is a ghostly reproduction of a ceremonial alert once used to warn eunuchs of palace fires. Others dismiss it as dripping water or settling stone. Historians still argue whether these rhythmic echoes are supernatural or simply acoustic quirks amplified in empty halls. You follow the sound to a collapsed doorway that leads to a long-forgotten staircase. Along the handrail, you notice faint handprints in soot. No mortal could leave such perfectly spaced imprints. A quirky tidbit claims these prints grow darker on midsummer nights, though no one has systematically recorded this phenomenon. You trace the prints with a fingertip, and a sudden draft rustles your hair, as if a silent figure brushed past. Ascending the stairs, you enter a half-lit gallery lined with faded frescoes of courtly life. One painting, now weathered beyond recognition, depicted a eunuch pouring rosehoney tea in the harem courtyard, a callback to Section 4's rosehoney tea. Beside it, a newer scratch appears overnight, the GS word for remember. No one knows who carved it or when. Visitors say they awake to find new etchings daily, like messages from beyond the grave. Historians still argue whether these marks result from vandalism by local youth or truly emerge without mortal hand. As the dawn sun rises, the gallery's shadows stretch and then contract. Here, under a collapsed arch, you hear a breathy sigh, as though someone just exhaled. You catch a glimpse of movement, a figure gliding around a corner, but when you round the arch, there's nothing but swirling dust. Fringe storytellers insist this is the spirit of Bain, a eunuch rumored to have died in service after refusing to divulge palace secrets under torture. Legend holds that his spectral vow redeems the palace at dawn, purifying the stones before courtiers return. Scholars still debate whether Bain ever lived or is a composite of multiple court attendants. Stories see cross a cracked mosaic floor depicting Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. It's said that on moonless nights, the mosaic's eyes glow, faintly blue, and phantom eunuchs kneel before it in silent supplication. You test the claim by placing a fingertip on a tessera. It feels colder than the surrounding tile, as if chilled by an otherworldly presence, yet daytime visitors never report the phenomenon. Historians still argue whether these reports stem from shared expectation or genuine nocturnal luminescence caused by mineral deposits. Moving toward the palace's old chapel, you pass a row of empty niches where eunuchs once knelt during morning prayers. Call back to Section 11's chamber whisperers. Now, each niche holds a lone candle, mysteriously lit at dawn. You spot one wick burning with a pale green flame, a quirk attributed to a remnant of ancient frankincense mixed with unknown resin. No one recalls lighting these candles, but palace custodians replace them each morning. Historians still debate whether the green-tinted flames are natural or magical. Finally, you arrive at the great audience hall, its massive wooden doors propped open by rubble. You stand at the dais where emperors once sat, now worn by time. At the exact moment the sun clears the horizon, you hear a whisper, "Await the key." It's faint but clear, drifting through the vaulted ceiling like a prayer. A single rusted key lies on the floor before you, allegedly the same spectral key from the opening legend. You bend to pick it up, only to find it vanish in your palm, leaving behind a sensation of both loss and awe. As sunlight floods the hall, the phantom eunuchs retreat into shadow, and the palace's living staff begin to stir. You slip out of the wing, your footsteps echoing against silent walls that hold their secrets once more. Behind you, the faintest rustle, perhaps the lock of a ghostly vault clicking shut, fades into the hush. And as you step into the courtyard, the morning breeze carries a distant echo of chanting, or maybe it's just the wind. Either way, the palace's myths endure, woven into its stones and whispered at dawn by ghosts who never truly left. You step onto a gravel path outside the newly established imperial palace in Addis Ababa, the morning sun glancing off freshly painted columns and whitewashed walls. Here, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the last cohort of eunuchs served a monarchy trembling beneath the pressures of modernization and colonial encroachment. You probably won't survive adapting to such rapid change. One day you're mixing rose honey tea, the next you're learning French drills, but tonight, we follow those final palace attendants as they navigate a world in flux, a mainstream fact. Emperor Menelik II moved the Ethiopian capital from Gondor to Addis Ababa in 1886, commissioning new palaces and administrative buildings that embodied both traditional Solomonic grandeur and European-inspired architecture. He retained a small number of eunuchs as personal attendants, valuing their discretion in court ceremonies and their institutional memory of Solomonic rituals. Yet their roles shifted, no longer guardians of hidden passages or agents of palace intrigue. They became stewards of faded customs in a court racing toward modernity. You follow a eunuch named Johannes down a broad marble staircase into the palace's modernized harem quarters. Steam radiator pipes line the walls, a jarring contrast to the torchlit corridors of Gondor. Johannes adjusts his linen headband with careful devotion, then opens a frosted glass door to reveal a salon where the empress and princesses receive European dignitaries. He pours coffee from a silver service, an Ottoman heirloom, and then offers a delicate porcelain cup of rose honey tea, honoring centuries-old palace hospitality even as new customs swirl around him. A quirky tidbit: some eunuchs in Addis Ababa experimented with adding espresso grounds to the rose honey tea, creating a bittersweet fusion nobody else dared to serve. Historians still argue whether this hybrid brew ever caught on or remained a daring experiment confined to palace inner circles. Amid French-style chandeliers and velvet draperies, you sense the eunuch's uneasy balancing act, preserving tradition while accommodating modern tastes. They lead tours of the palace, Solomonic regalia, crown, scepter, and orb now displayed behind protective glass cases. Johannes opens a glass door with trembling hands and lifts the crown from its velvet cushion, whispering a ritual blessing in Giez. a mainstream fact. After Italy's invasion attempts and the subsequent Battle of Adwa in 1896, Emperor Menelik II encouraged public displays of imperial symbols to foster national pride. Yet the eunuchs mourned the loss of ceremonial secrecy, when only a select few saw the crown's hidden gems. Historians still argue whether these public exhibitions democratized royal heritage or diminished its sanctity. You wander into a side chamber where a small group of eunuchs gathers beneath portraits of past emperors. They share memories of gondors, cucumber gardens, and hidden cisterns. A callback to Section 15's Secret Aqueduct. Callback Secret Aqueduct Cistern. They handle antique keys rusted but still heavy in their palms keys. That once unlocked royal vaults now sealed indefinitely. You catch the faint aroma of lavender and crushed myrrh from a rubbed linen cloth passed around for comfort. It's said that the last eunuch apothecary taught palace doctors to use those cloths in operating theaters when European surgeons arrived, to set up modern clinics. Fringe accounts claim eunuchs mixed traditional powders with antiseptics, foreshadowing Ethiopian medical hybrids. Historians still argue whether eunuch contributions to early modern Ethiopian medicine left lasting legacies or were overshadowed by Western practices. Outside, you traverse manicured lawns, edged with jacaranda trees, their purple blossoms carpeting the ground. Eunuchs escort guests through the rose gardens, reciting the history of each variety: damask roses from Damascus, wild African rosemary, and the fabled night-blooming cereus. A mainstream fact, Menelik's wife, Empress Taitu, was instrumental in cultivating Addis Ababa's gardens, hiring eunuchs as head gardeners due to their reputation for meticulous care. You see a eunuch deftly pruning a bloom with long-handled shears, his movements as precise as his ceremonial bows from Section 7 callback. Precise crescent bow. He ties a small bundle of petals into a sachet to be placed in the Empress's wardrobe for its calming fragrance. You follow him into the palace's new Council of Ministers chamber, where eunuchs still attend weekly sessions, though now alongside elected officials and foreign advisors. Johann stands behind the emperor's chair, gloved fingers folded in front of him. He whispers protocol reminders: when to offer water, when to signal agreement with a gentle nod, and when to remain utterly still. A fringe detail during early 20th century visits by British envoys. Eunuchs reportedly adjusted the angle of diplomatic seating to maximize eye contact and unspoken manipulation of perceived power dynamics. Historians still argue whether such subtle calibrations influenced treaty negotiations or amounted to mere palace folklore. The palace's soundscape has changed. Electric lights buzz overhead, typewriters clack in adjacent offices, and shortwave radios crackle with news of World War I across continents. Yet in quieter corners, eunuchs maintain ancient chants during evening prayers in the palace chapel. You hear them reciting psalms and jiyas as a lone oil lamp flickers the same ritual you witnessed in Section 3's purification baths. Callback. Psalm chants in jiyas. Their voices rise and fall like a gentle tide, anchoring the palace to its spiritual roots even as technology marches forward. As night falls, you join Johanns in the grand dining hall, where a blend of Ethiopian injera platters and imported French pastries line the tables. Eunuchs serve dishes with solemn precision, balancing European silverware on linen napkins, a careful choreography learned from decades of palace training. A quirky tidbit: some eunuchs develop their own fusion recipes, drizzling honey over croissants or pairing escargot with Berber spice. Whether these innovations spread beyond palace walls remains uncertain. Scholars still debate if any eunuch-inspired dishes made it into wider Ethiopian cuisine. Later, you accompany Yo to the palace roof, where he lights a single lantern and surveys the city of Addis Ababa laid out below. He gestures toward the twinkling clusters of lights, electric street lamps, tram lines, and the distant silhouette of Mount Entodohir. Under a sky transformed from Gondor's violet dusk to Addis's electric glow, you feel the ache of transition. Eunuchs unmoored from centuries of courtly purpose, striving to find relevance in a new era. As you descend, you pass a locked door marked eunuch quarters. Inside, a handful of aged attendants share cigarettes wrapped in traditional injera paper, leaning against chipped plaster walls. They exchange stories of vanished palace wings, secret staircases, and the quiet pride of serving sovereigns for generations. A mainstream fact: by the 1930s, Emperor Haile Selassie abolished many leftover Solomonic customs, including the eunuch cause. The last eunuchs were pensioned off or assigned minor clerical roles. Historians still argue whether this marked progress toward modernization or the erasure of invaluable cultural custodians. You step into the cool night air, palace gates closing behind you with a soft click. The eunuchs' lanterns flicker one last time before being extinguished, extinguishing a living link to Ethiopia's Solomonic past. And as you walk away, you carry with you their final vigil, a delicate fusion of tradition and change. A class of silent stewards whose footsteps echoed through to capitals, only to fade beneath the hum of modernity. You step into a quiet museum hall tucked behind Addis Ababa's National Palace, where glass cases display fragments of Gondarine frescoes and lacquered keys once carried by eunuchs. Here, in these hushed galleries, Their legacy whispers through time, tracing the contours of devotion that slip beneath modern awareness. You probably won't survive encountering every relic. Each one seems to pulse with stories better left half-heard. But let's wander these corridors where echoes of silent service linger in stone and parchment. A mainstream fact: Ethiopia's National Museum catalogues several eunuch artifacts, including 17th century bronze medallions, stamped with imperial seals and linen headbands, preserved in sealed display boxes. These objects remind visitors that eunuchs served as both confidants and custodians of crown regalia. You lean close to a case holding a small ivory hairpin carved with a palm motif recalled Section 12's puzzles and hairpins. Callback: ivory hairpins. This hairpin once hid a rolled-up love poem, hinting at the human bonds eunuchs forged behind palace walls. Beyond the cases, a life-size diorama reconstructs a courtyard scene. Artificial jasmine vines climbing trellises, alabaster cups on low tables, and mannequin eunuchs in muted tunics. Visitors drift through as if in a dream, sensing the hush even as audio guides whisper commentary. A quirky tidbit: the museum's sound designers looped a soft cabre drumbeat to evoke the heartbeat-like rhythm you first felt in Section 8's music processions. The historians still argue whether this inclusion enhances visitor immersion or borders on theatrical overreach. You move to a remnant of a secret passageway, salvaged from Feudal and installed behind glass panels and actual spiral staircase, tread and copper strip hinge you once crawled through in. Section 15, callback: copper strip unlocking secret doors. Standing before it, you feel your pulse quicken, as if you might press the panel and descend once more into darkness. A single fingerprint smudge on the glass left by a curious hand reminds you that the eunuch's paths, though sealed for centuries, still invite exploration. A display on courtly etiquette and gesture features video projections of modern interpreters performing the crescent bow and silent semaphore gestures taught to eunuchs. You watch their slow, deliberate movements echo the training drills from Section 7 and Section 6, subtle knots of history rendered in live action. Callback: crescent bow and silent semaphore training. One interpreter pauses mid-bow and glances at her reflection, prompting a wry smile. Just imagine if you had to bow 20 different ways before breakfast. Joke 1. You can't even manage one without wobbling. Adjacent is an interactive exhibit on gender fluidity in Solomonic Ethiopia, showcasing panels on eunuch identity from Section 10's debates over masculinity. Visitors leave sticky note reflections. I never knew non-binary roles existed so long ago, reads one, yet a plaque cautions. Historians still argue whether eunuchs forged a distinct third gender identity or remained confined within binary expectations. The debate simmers like a dormant ember, inviting new scholarship, even as it spotlights the enduring relevance of eunuch experiences. You pause beside an installation of modern artwork, a series of mirrors etched with Solomonic lion seals, each reflecting the viewer's face alongside a silhouetted eunuch figure. The artist explains that the work interrogates service beyond flesh by inviting visitors to see themselves in the eunuch's role and unsettling humility. Joke 2. It's like Tinder, but instead of swiping, you reflect on your devotion. The piece hums with quiet power, reminding you that echoes of eunuch service still resonate in contemporary Ethiopian culture. A small reading room nearby houses rare manuscripts, court chronicles in GS, Portuguese letters with invisibling notations, callback, invisibling correspondence, and fragile diaries of last-generation eunuchs who chronicled palace life in Addis Ababa. One diary entry, dated 1905, muses: "Our voices, muted by decree, speak loudest when no one listens." A poignant line that underscores how these men shaped history in whispers. Scholars still argue whether any unrecovered diaries survive in private collections or have consigned themselves to oblivion. You wander into a convex gallery wall where projected silhouettes of eunuchs glide among visitors. The projections recount anecdotes, the secret chalk marks along staircases, callback, chalk marks, the green flame candles of deserted chapels, callback, green tinted flames, the last apothecaries, lavender hued oils, callback, lavender scented sleep oil. Each vignette is paired with soft footstep sounds, an immersive nod to the ghost eunuchs from Section 18, suggesting they linger beyond mortal departure. In the final alcove, you discover an empty pedestal with a single spotlit plaque. Place your hands here to feel their presence. Beneath lies a discreet button. You hesitate, then press it. Immediately, cool air wafts across your palms, and the softest murmur brushes your ears. A rustle of silk robes, the faint creak of a sandal, a silent kneeling crescent of breath. Joke 3. It's like AirPods for ancient whispers. The effect is subtle, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable, an invitation to bridge centuries with a simple touch. Stepping back, you surveyed the hall. The artifacts, the exhibits, the echoes, they form a tapestry of devotion woven from silence, ritual, and tender loyalty. Eunuchs may have vanished from palace corridors, but their legacy endures in modern memory, museums, and ongoing scholarly debates. Their silent footsteps still resound in stone and glass, reminding you that service, like history, is often whispered rather than proclaimed. Now, as you settle deeper into your pillow's embrace, let your mind drift through candlelit corridors and jasmine-scented courtyards. Feel the gentle cadence of kibro drums fading into a distant heartbeat, a lullaby woven from bronze echoes and linen soft steps. Imagine those ivory hairpins, secret keys, and hushed gestures returning to stillness. Beneath moonlit arches, each relic, each whispered story, softens into quiet memory. In this calm, the eunuch's devotion becomes a gentle tide, pulling at the shores of your consciousness. Their silent service, once vital to imperial splendor, now transforms into a soothing current that carries you toward rest. Picture the green glow candles, the lavender dust-lined vials, the moss-coated stones of hidden stairwells, all melting into shadowy dreams where history and imagination intertwine. Allow each breath to echo the hush of forgotten galleries, each exhale releasing the day's noise. The decades of whispered counsel, secret passages, and silent vows gently fold into one another, creating a seamless tapestry of devotion and discretion. Let the final image linger, a solitary lantern winking out on an empty palace roof, its glow replaced by starlight and distant murmurs carried on the breeze. Drift, unhurried, through these storied halls as they dissolve around you. The eunuch's legacy woven from stone, silk, and silence guides your journey inward, toward the quiet center of your own mind. And as each corridor fades, may your dreams carry the softest footsteps of history's silent sentinels, lulling you into peaceful slumber.